The salt-tinged breeze carried the scent of jasmine through the open windows of Coastal Bloom. As I tallied the weekend's receipts, $347 more than last weekend, and our handmade soap line had completely sold out again. I smiled as I tucked the cash into the vintage register. I'd restored myself the same one I'd found at a flea market 5 years ago, when I could barely afford the $20 asking price. My fingers traced the register's brass edges, remembering the hope I'd carried that day. Hope mixed with terror, really. The kind that comes when you're betting everything on a dream that might crumble in your hands. But here I was 5 years later, watching the late afternoon sun stream through windows that now displayed sold-out signs more often than not. Another successful day at the best little boutique on the coast, I murmured to myself, straightening a display of locally made pottery. Each piece told a story, like the ceramic mugs crafted by Alina, a single mother who'd started her pottery business in her garage, or the hand-woven scarves from Marcus, a former investment banker who'd traded his suits for a loom after his wife passed. These weren't just products on my shelves. They were dreams made tangible, stories of people who refused to give up. Just like mine, the bell above the door chimed, and I looked up, expecting to see Mrs. Rivera with her usual Sunday evening visit. Instead, Derek walked in, his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up from another long day at the real estate office. Even after 3 years of marriage, my heart still did that little flutter when he smiled at me. "Hey, beautiful," he said, crossing the shop to kiss my cheek. "How was business today?" "Good," I said, gesturing toward the nearly empty displays. "Really good, actually. I think we're going to need to expand our soap supplier soon. Maybe even consider hiring part-time help." Derek nodded absently, but I caught the distant look in his eyes, the same one he'd been wearing for weeks now. Ever since Chloe's engagement announcement, his little sister's wedding had consumed every family conversation lately, transforming even casual dinners into elaborate planning sessions. "That's great, honey," he said, but his attention was already drifting toward the window overlooking the boardwalk. "Listen, I was thinking we could grab dinner at Romano's tonight. There's something I want to discuss with you." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. In 3 years of marriage, Derek had never suggested Romano's for casual conversation. Romano's was where he'd proposed, where we celebrated our first anniversary, where we went when things were either incredibly wonderful or needed to be handled with care. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my hand instinctively reaching for his arm. "Everything's fine," he said quickly, covering my hand with his "just some family stuff. "Nothing bad, I promise." But as we locked up the shop and walked toward the restaurant, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Derek's family had always been different from mine, where I'd grown up with hand-me-downs and coupon clipping. The Whitmores had summer houses and college funds, where my family celebrated small victories with homemade cake. There's marked milestones with expensive gifts and elaborate gestures. I'd learned to navigate their world over the years, smiling through conversations about country clubs I'd never join and vacation homes I'd never own. But I'd also learned that when the Whitmores had family discussions, someone usually ended up making sacrifices. And somehow, those sacrifices never seemed to fall on Derek or Chloe. Romano's was busy for a Sunday evening, filled with tourists and locals celebrating the end of another weekend. We were seated at a corner table with a view of the harbor, where fishing boats bobbed gently in the golden light of approaching sunset. Derek ordered wine and other red flag, since he usually stuck to beer, and spent the first 20 minutes talking about everything except whatever had brought us here. Finally, as our appetizers arrived, he cleared his throat and reached across the table for my hand. "Layla, you know how important family is to me," he began, and my stomach dropped. Nothing good ever started with that phrase. "And you know how much my parents appreciate everything you've brought to our family." "Derek, what's going on?" He squeezed my hand, his thumb rubbing nervous circles across my knuckles. "Chloe and Theo's wedding is next month, and you know how the Whitmore family handles these things. When someone gets married, we all pitch in to help them start their new life together." I nodded slowly, remembering the stories. When Derek's cousin Jennifer got married, the family had pulled together for a down payment on her first house. When his brother Michael tied the knot, they'd gifted him a brand new truck for his landscaping business. "My parents gave me the watch collection when we got married," Derek continued, gesturing to the vintage Rolex on his wrist that had belonged to his grandfather, "and they helped us with the down payment on the house." That wasn't exactly how I remembered it. Yes, his parents had contributed to our down payment, but I'd also worked 2 jobs for 18 months to save my half. I'd sold my car and ridden a borrowed bicycle to work for 6 months. But Derek's family had a way of remembering their contributions while forgetting everyone else's. "Okay," I said carefully. "What does this have to do with me?" Derek took a long sip of wine, and I realized his hands were shaking slightly. "Chloe has always dreamed of running her own business. She's talked about it since college, having her own place, being her own boss, building something meaningful. The words hit me like cold water. Derek, no. Just hear me out, he said quickly. She's always admired what you've built with Coastal Bloom. The way you've created this beautiful space, how you've connected with the community, how you've made something out of nothing. She looks up to you, Layla. She really does. I pulled my hand back, my appetite disappearing entirely. What exactly are you asking me? I'm asking you to consider giving Coastal Bloom to Chloe as a wedding gift. The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire I couldn't see but could suddenly smell burning. Around us, the restaurant continued its evening, rhythm servers carrying trays, couples laughing over shared desserts, children coloring on paper placemats. But at our table, everything had stopped. You want me to give her my business? I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I want us to give her our business, Derek corrected. We're married. Layla, what's yours is mine, and what's mine is yours. This would be coming from both of us. I stared at him, searching his face for some sign that this was an elaborate joke. But Derek's expression was earnest, almost pleading. He genuinely believed what he was saying. Somehow, in his mind, my 5 years of 18-hour days burned. Fingers and sleepless nights had become our accomplishment. Derek, I built that business from nothing, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I took out a microloan when no bank would give me a regular loan. I painted every wall, refinished every piece of furniture, developed every vendor relationship. I worked at a diner until 2 a.m. for 2 years just to pay the rent. I know that, he said, and I'm so proud of what you've accomplished. But think about what this could mean for Chloe. She's never had the chance to prove herself. The way you have, she's always lived in the shadow of family expectations. This could be her opportunity to shine. And what about my opportunity to continue building what I started? Derek's face softened and he reached for my hand again. I let him take it, but I didn't squeeze back. Honey, you've already proven everything you need to prove. Everyone in town knows how successful you are. You could start something new, something even bigger. With Chloe running Coastal Bloom, you'd be free to pursue other dreams. Other dreams. As if the boutique was some hobby I'd grown bored with, rather than the culmination of everything I'd ever wanted to achieve. As if 5 years of building relationships with local artisans and customers was something I could simply walk away from and start over. What does Chloe know about running a retail business? I asked. She has a business degree, Derek said, and she's worked in event planning. She understands customer service and marketing. Plus, she'd have you two mentor her through the transition. I almost laughed. Chloe's event planning consisted of organizing her sorority's charity galas in college, and her business degree had been funded by parents who'd never let her experience the consequences of failure. She'd never worked a day in retail, never had to choose between paying rent and buying inventory, never stayed up all night worrying about whether she'd make payroll. Has she asked for this? I said, or is this your family's idea? Derek's hesitation told me everything I needed to know. It came up during dinner last week, he admitted. Chloe mentioned how much she admired your business model, and my parents thought it would be perfect. She was so excited when I told her we were considering it. You told her we were considering it, not. I'm thinking about asking Layla. Not let me discuss this with my wife first. He'd already presented it as a done deal, leaving me to be the villain if I refused. Derek, I need you to understand something, I said, pulling my hand back and folding both of mine in my lap. Coastal Bloom isn't just a business to me. It's not just a source of income or a nice hobby. It's part of who I am. It's every dream I've ever had made real. It's proof that I can build something beautiful and meaningful with my own hands. I know that, he said, but his tone suggested he didn't really understand the depth of what I was saying. But families make sacrifices for each other. My parents sacrificed to help us get started. Now it's our turn to help Chloe. Your parents didn't sacrifice their identities, I said. They didn't give up the thing that defined them. They gave money, Derek. I'm being asked to give up my life's work. Our server approached with our entrees, but Derek waved her away. The interruption gave me a moment to study my husband's face, searching for the man who'd fallen in love with my ambition, who'd celebrated every small victory in the boutique's early days, who'd told me how proud he was of what I'd built. Instead, I saw a man who looked genuinely confused by my resistance. In his world, family loyalty trumped individual ambition. In his world, women supported their husbands' families, even at the cost of their own dreams. In his world, my objections were selfish rather than reasonable. I need time to think about this, I said finally. Relief flooded Derek's face. In his mind, I need time to think meant yes, but I need to process it first. He reached for his wine glass, clearly ready to move on to easier topics. Of course, he said, take all the time you need. But Layla, I really hope you'll consider it. This could bring our families even closer together, and it would mean the world to Chloe. I nodded and picked up my pasta, letting Derek carry the conversation for the rest of the evening. He talked about wedding plans and honeymoon destinations and his latest real estate deals, his voice bright with the assumption that everything was settled between us. But as I listened to him describe Chloe's excitement about her new business venture, I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. This wasn't just about giving away my boutique. This was about Derek's fundamental misunderstanding of who I was and what I'd accomplished. This was about his family's assumption that I'd smile and sacrifice, and disappear into the background when they needed something from me. We drove home in companionable silence, Derek's hand on my knee as he hummed along to the radio. He kissed me goodnight at the top of the stairs, his lips lingering on my forehead in a way that felt both loving and patronizing. "I'm proud of you for considering this," he whispered. "It shows what a generous heart you have." I waited until I heard his breathing even out before I slipped out of bed and made my way downstairs to the kitchen. The house felt different in the darkness, full of shadows and secrets. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the table where Derek and I had shared 1,000 meals, where we'd planned our future and celebrated our victories. But now, as I sat alone in the darkness, I realized that Derek had never truly seen my victories as mine alone. In his mind, my success was our success, which meant it was also his family's success, which meant it was available to be given away when the family needed it. I thought about Chloe, beautiful and charming and utterly unprepared for the reality of running a business. I thought about the artisans whose livelihoods depended on my boutique, about Mrs. Rivera who stopped by every Sunday to tell me how much my shop meant to the community, about the young women who'd told me that seeing my success had inspired them to pursue their own dreams. I thought about the girl I'd been 5 years ago, terrified and determined, painting walls at midnight because she couldn't afford to hire help. That girl had built something real and lasting and beautiful, and now I was being asked to hand it over to someone who'd never worked for anything in her life, simply because she was family and it was expected. The tea grew cold in my hands as I sat there, watching the first hints of dawn creep across the horizon. By the time Derek's alarm went off upstairs, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to refuse outright. That would make me the villain in this story, the selfish wife who wouldn't help her new family. Instead, I was going to do something much more dangerous. I was going to say yes, but on my terms. Derek found me in the kitchen, already dressed and making breakfast. He kissed my cheek and squeezed my shoulders, his good mood evident in every gesture. "Morning, beautiful," he said. "Sleep well." "Actually, I've been thinking about our conversation last night," I said, not turning from the stove where I was scrambling eggs. "About Chloe and the boutique?" I felt him tense behind me, hope and anxiety warring in his voice, and I turned to face him, my expression carefully neutral. "I think you're right. Family should help family, and if Chloe really wants to run a business, then maybe this is her chance." Derek's face lit up like sunrise. "Really? You mean it?" "I mean it," I said, serving eggs onto his plate. "But Derek, running a business isn't like planning a party. It's not something you can learn overnight. If I'm going to trust Chloe with something I've built, I need to know she's truly ready for it." "Of course," Derek said quickly. "Whatever you think is best." "Good," I said, sitting down across from him with my own breakfast. "Because I have some conditions." Derek paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Conditions?" "Nothing unreasonable," I said, smiling sweetly. "Just some standard business practices to make sure the transition goes smoothly. I'll need to evaluate Chloe's readiness, train her properly, make sure she understands every aspect of running the boutique. These things take time to do right." Relief washed over Derek's face again. In his mind, I was being thorough, not suspicious. "That makes perfect sense. How long do you think the training would take?" "Oh, I don't know," I said, taking a deliberate bite of toast. "A few months, maybe? We'll just have to see how quickly she picks things up." Derek reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Layla. This means everything to me, to my family. Chloe is going to be so excited." "I'm sure she will be," I said, "and she would be excited." I thought as Derek finished his breakfast and prepared to leave for work, she'd be excited right up until she realized that running a real business required more than pretty Instagram posts and charming customers. She'd be excited until she discovered that I had no intention of simply handing over 5 years of work to someone who'd never earned it. Derek kissed me goodbye, his step light with the satisfaction of a man who believed he'd solved all his problems. As soon as his car disappeared down the street, I picked up my phone and scrolled to a familiar contact. Tessa answered on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Layla, it's 7 in the morning. This better be good." "It's very good," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. Derek wants me to give Coastal Bloom to his sister as a wedding gift. So you want to create a conditional transfer agreement? She said when I finished. Something that appears generous while actually establishing clear benchmarks for competency and commitment. Exactly. I want everything documented. Training, requirements, performance evaluations, community integration standards. If Chloe is going to inherit something I built, she needs to prove she understands what she's inheriting. Vivian's smile was sharp as a blade. I can draft something that will protect both you and the business while appearing completely reasonable to anyone who doesn't understand the realities of retail management. How long will that take? Give me 2 hours. I'll have a preliminary draft ready before your lunch meeting. She stood, gathering her papers with efficient movements. Layla, I want you to know that what Derek is asking of you is unconscionable. In any other context, asking someone to hand over their life's work to an unqualified family member would be recognized as emotional manipulation. But in the context of family loyalty and wedding traditions, it's just generosity, I said bitterly. Exactly. Which is why this approach is brilliant. You're not refusing to be generous. You're ensuring that your generosity is responsible and sustainable. After Vivian left, Tessa helped me prepare for the lunch meeting. We role-played different scenarios, anticipating Chloe's questions and reactions. Tessa, who'd met Chloe several times at family gatherings, proved remarkably good at mimicking her breathless enthusiasm and casual entitlement. Oh my God, Layla, this is like such a dream come true. Tessa gushed in a pitch-perfect imitation. I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur, and now I can skip all the boring startup stuff and jump right into having an established business. That's exactly what she's going to say, I realized. She thinks she's inheriting the fun parts without any of the responsibility. Which brings us to the real question, Tessa said, dropping the act. What happens when she realizes what you're actually asking of her? I considered this as I touched up my makeup and gathered my things for lunch. One of 3 things. Either she rise to the challenge and prove me wrong about her character, she'll reveal her true priorities and back out gracefully, or she'll try to circumvent the requirements and expose herself as completely unsuitable. And if it's option 3, then Derek and his family will have to face exactly what they were asking me to sacrifice, I said. And I'll have documented proof that I tried to make this work. Romano's was busy with the lunch crowd when I arrived, tourists and locals mixing at tables overlooking the harbor. I'd chosen a dress that struck the right balance between professional and approachable, the kind of outfit that suggested I was taking this meeting seriously while remaining accessible. I wanted to look like someone who was genuinely excited about mentoring her sister-in-law, not someone who was planning an elaborate test. Chloe arrived 15 minutes late, her entrance as dramatic as always. She wore a flowing sundress that probably cost more than most of my customers spent in a month. Her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the coastal humidity. She moved through the restaurant like someone accustomed to having people notice her, her smile bright and confident as she spotted me at our table. Layla, she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that smelled of expensive perfume and hairspray. I can't believe this is really happening. Derek told me about your amazing offer, and I literally couldn't sleep last night because I was so excited. I'm so glad, I said, settling back into my seat as Chloe arranged herself across from me. I think this could be a wonderful opportunity for both of us. It's going to be perfect, Chloe said, already reaching for the breadbasket. I've been dreaming about having my own business for years, and Coastal Bloom is exactly the kind of aesthetic I want to be associated with. Those rustic chic vibes are so on trend right now. Rustic chic vibes. I managed to keep my smile steady while internally cataloging this first red flag. My boutique wasn't designed to follow trends, it was designed to showcase timeless craftsmanship and support local artisans. But apparently, Chloe saw it as a backdrop for whatever image she wanted to project. I'm so happy you appreciate what we've built there, I said carefully. Of course, there will be some transition requirements too. Make sure everything goes smoothly. Oh, absolutely, Chloe said, waving a hand dismissively. I mean, you'll show me where everything is and introduce me to the important customers, right? How long do you think that will take? A week or two? A week or two? To learn a business I'd spent 5 years building, to understand relationships I'd cultivated over thousands of interactions, to master skills I'd developed through countless mistakes and small victories. Well, it might take a bit longer than that, I said, signaling our server for wine. Running a boutique involves quite a lot of different skills: inventory management, vendor relationships, financial planning, staff supervision, customer service, marketing, community engagement. I want to make sure you're completely prepared before we make the transition official. Chloe's bright smile flickered slightly. How much longer are we talking about? Oh, I don't know exactly. It depends on how quickly you pick things up. But I was thinking we should probably plan for at least 3 to 6 months of intensive training and evaluation. Evaluation. The word came out sharper than Chloe had probably intended. Nothing intimidating, I assured her. Just standard business practices to make sure the transition is successful. I'll need to document your progress for legal and insurance purposes. Plus, I want to make sure all our vendors and customers feel confident about the change in ownership. Our server appeared with menus and wine recommendations, giving Chloe a moment to process what I'd said. When he left, her smile was back in place, but I caught the calculation in her eyes. That seems like a long time, she said. I mean, how hard can it be? You sell pretty things to tourists and locals. It's not exactly brain surgery. The casual dismissal of everything I'd built hit like a slap, but I kept my expression neutral. This was exactly what I'd hoped to uncover Chloe's fundamental misunderstanding of what my business actually required. You're right that the basic concept is straightforward, I said, but the execution can be quite complex. For instance, did you know that we carry products from over 40 different local artisans? Each one has different ordering requirements, payment terms, and seasonal availability patterns. And that's just the inventory management side. Chloe nodded absently, but I could see her attention drifting to the couple at the next table who were taking photos of their food. Then there's the financial side, I continued. Monthly profit and loss statements, quarterly tax filings, annual inventory assessments, insurance renewals, lease negotiations with the landlord, plus managing the part-time staff schedules and payroll. Right, but you have people who handle that stuff, don't you? Chloe asked, finally focusing back on me. Actually, I handle most of it myself. It's more cost-effective, and it keeps me connected to every aspect of the business. The look that crossed Chloe's face was priceless, a mixture of confusion and mild horror, as if I'd just told her I also cleaned my own house and did my own laundry. Well, I'm sure I can hire people for the boring administrative stuff, she said quickly. I want to focus on the creative aspects, the styling, the social media presence, maybe expanding into some lifestyle branding opportunities. Lifestyle branding opportunities. I took a sip of wine to buy myself a moment, wondering if Chloe had any idea what the boutique's actual profit margins looked like, or how hiring additional staff would impact the bottom line. That's definitely something we can explore, I said. Once you've mastered the foundational aspects of running the business, I always think it's important to understand how something works before you start changing it. Of course, Chloe said, but her tone suggested she thought this was unnecessarily cautious. So when can I start?
I'm thinking I could come in a few mornings a week, maybe help with the fun stuff while you handle the technical details. The fun stuff, as if customer service was all smiles and compliments. As if managing inventory was just playing with pretty objects, as if building vendor relationships was simply chatting with interesting people. Actually, I think it would be better if you started by learning the business from the ground up, I said. That way, you'll have a complete understanding of every aspect before taking over ownership. From the ground up, opening procedures, cleaning routines, inventory receiving, customer service basics, all the foundational skills that make everything else possible. Chloe's perfect composure cracked slightly. You want me to clean? Well, yes, maintaining the boutique's appearance is crucial to creating the right atmosphere. Plus, it's a great way to really understand the space and notice details you might miss otherwise. Our server returned to take our orders, and I used the interruption to study Chloe's face. She was clearly rethinking something, but I couldn't tell if it was the wisdom of taking over the boutique or just the approach I was suggesting. You know, she said once we were alone again. Maybe we could streamline this process a bit. I mean, you've already built such a successful business. Maybe instead of me learning every little detail, you could just stay on as a manager while I handle the ownership and strategic direction. And there it was. Chloe didn't want to run a business, she wanted to own one while someone else did the actual work. She wanted the prestige and potential profits without any of the responsibility or effort. I'm afraid that wouldn't work, I said smoothly. The whole point of this gift is to help you build your own independent success. You can't really claim to be a business owner if someone else is running the business for you, right? Of course, Chloe said quickly. I just meant for the transition period, but you're absolutely right. I want to earn this properly. She didn't want to earn anything properly. But she was smart enough to recognize that saying so would end the conversation. Instead, she was going to agree to my terms while looking for ways to circumvent them later. I'm so glad you understand, I said. I think this is going to be a wonderful learning experience for both of us. We spent the next hour discussing logistics while I watched Chloe's enthusiasm dim with each practical detail I shared. By the time we'd finished lunch, she was asking pointed questions about timelines and wondering aloud whether it might be better to wait until after her honeymoon to begin the training process. Actually, I think starting sooner would be better, I said as we walked back toward the boardwalk. That way, you'll have time to really settle into the role before the busy summer season hits. The summer season, oh yes. Tourism picks up dramatically between Memorial Day and Labor Day. Sales can triple during peak weeks. It's wonderful for the bottom line, but it requires much more intensive management. Chloe looked genuinely alarmed. Triple sometimes. More. Last 4th of July weekend, we had customers lined up outside the door. I worked 16-hour days for a week straight, but it was our best month ever. 16-hour days. I watched the words sink in, watched Chloe realize that owning a successful boutique might involve more work than she'd anticipated. In her mind, business ownership meant freedom and flexibility, not longer hours and greater responsibility. Well, she said finally, I guess we should set up a meeting to go over all the details. When works best for you? How about tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock at the boutique? We can start with a complete walkthrough of the daily opening procedures. 9 in the morning. Chloe's voice pitched slightly higher. The boutique opens at 10, so we need time to prepare everything beforehand. Unlock, disarm the security system, turn on all the lights, check the displays, count the register, review the day's appointments and special orders. It usually takes about an hour if you're efficient. By the time we parted ways, Chloe's bright enthusiasm had been replaced by thoughtful concern. She promised to be at the boutique at 9 sharp. But something in her tone suggested she was already looking for excuses to postpone. I walked back to Coastal Bloom with a lightness in my step I hadn't felt since Derek's bombshell announcement. Phase 1 of my plan was complete. Chloe now understood that running my business would involve actual work. The question was whether she'd rise to the challenge or look for an easier path. My phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. Draft contract. Ready for review? This is going to be fun, I smiled, looking up at the hand-painted sign above my boutique's door. Coastal Bloom had weathered 5 years of challenges, growing stronger with each season. It could certainly survive whatever test the next few months would bring. The only question was whether the Whitmore family would survive the reality of what they'd asked for. At 8:57 the next morning, I stood behind the counter of Coastal Bloom, watching the boardwalk through the front window. A few early joggers passed by, and Mrs. Rivera was already arranging her flower stand across the street. The morning light caught the hand-painted sign above my door just right, casting a warm glow across the weathered wood that Derek's brother had crafted for me 3 years ago. 9 o'clock came and went. Then 9:15, at 9:20, my phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. Running a few minutes late, traffic was crazy. Be there soon, I smiled, making a note in the small journal I'd brought specifically for documenting this process. Punctuality was crucial in retail. Customers expected businesses to open on time, and staff needed to be reliable. It was a small thing, but small things revealed character. Chloe finally arrived at 9:30-7, breathless and clutching a Starbucks cup the size of a small bucket. She wore white jeans and a flowing blouse that would have been perfect for brunch but was spectacularly impractical for retail work. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she hurried toward me, already talking before she'd fully entered the shop. I'm so sorry I'm late, she said, her voice carrying the kind of breathless apology that suggested this was a regular occurrence rather than an exception. My GPS took me on this crazy detour, and then I had to stop for coffee because I'm completely useless before caffeine, and you know how those drive-through lines can be. I listened to her explanation while observing her appearance. The white jeans would show every speck of dust. The blouse would catch on jewelry displays, and the heels would be torture after a few hours on her feet. Everything about her outfit screamed I'm playing dress up as a business owner rather than I'm here to work. No problem, I said, making another note. These things happen. Should we get started? Absolutely, Chloe said, her enthusiasm returning as she looked around the boutique. God, I love what you've done with this place. It's like a Pinterest board come to life. A Pinterest board? I bit back my first response and instead gestured toward the register area. Let's start with the opening procedures. The first thing we do every morning is unlock the register and count the cash drawer to make sure everything matches yesterday's closing total. I walked her through the process step by step, explaining how to operate the vintage register I'd painstakingly restored, how to organize the bills and coins, how to record the starting amount in the daily log. Chloe nodded along, but I could see her attention drifting to the displays around the shop. "This is so cute," she said, interrupting my explanation of credit card processing to pick up a hand-thrown ceramic mug. "Who makes these?" "Elena Vasquez," I said. "She's been one of our artisans for 3 years now. She works out of her home studio and specializes in functional pottery with coastal themes." "How much do we charge for these?" $28 for the mugs, $35 for the larger pieces. Elena sets her own prices. We just take a commission on sales. Chloe nearly dropped the mug. $28 for a coffee cup. It's a handmade ceramic piece created by a local artist. I explained patiently. Our customers understand that they're paying for craftsmanship, uniqueness, and supporting local artisans. Plus, these pieces are built to last for decades, but you could get similar mugs at Target for like $5. You could, I agreed, but they wouldn't be unique, they wouldn't support local artists, and they wouldn't have the same quality or character. Our customers choose to shop here because they value those differences. Chloe carefully returned the mug to its display, but I caught the skeptical expression that crossed her face in her mind. I was probably overcharging customers for products they could get cheaper elsewhere. She didn't understand that the entire point of Coastal Bloom was to offer something different from mass-produced alternatives. "Let's continue with the opening procedures," I suggested, guiding her back to the register. "After we count the cash drawer, we need to check the security system, turn on all the lights, and make sure all the displays are properly arranged." I walked her through each step, showing her how to arm and disarm the security system, where the light switches were located, how to check that each display looked inviting and well-stocked. Chloe followed along dutifully, but I could tell she was mentally categorizing these tasks as busy work rather than essential business operations. "Do you really have to do all this every single day?" she asked as I demonstrated how to properly fold and arrange the hand-woven scarves in the textile display. "Every single day," I confirmed. Consistency is crucial in retail. Customers notice when things look sloppy or disorganized, even if they can't articulate exactly what's wrong. "But couldn't you just hire someone to do this stuff, like a part-time assistant to handle the boring details?" "I do have part-time help during busy periods," I said, "but as the owner, I need to understand every aspect of my business. Plus, these daily routines help me stay connected to the shop and notice when something needs attention." Chloe nodded, but her expression suggested she thought I was being unnecessarily hands-on. In her world, owners delegated routine tasks to employees while focusing on bigger picture issues. She didn't understand that in a small business, especially one built on personal relationships and quality standards, the owner's attention to detail was often what separated success from failure. At 10 o'clock, I unlocked the front door and flipped the sign to open. The morning light streamed in, illuminating the carefully arranged displays and creating the warm, welcoming atmosphere that had drawn customers to Coastal Bloom for 5 years. "This is so exciting," Chloe said, positioning herself behind the counter like she was posing for a photo. "I can't wait to put my own stamp on this place." "What kind of changes were you thinking about?" I asked, genuinely curious about her vision for the boutique. "Well, first I'd want to update the social media presence," she said, pulling out her phone. "The Instagram account is so outdated. You need more lifestyle content, more behind-the-scenes posts. Maybe some influencer partnerships." I glanced at the phone she was now using to take selfies against the backdrop of my displays. "What's wrong with our current social media approach? It's to focus on the products," Chloe said, snapping photos of herself pretending to arrange jewelry. "You need more personality, more brand storytelling. People want to buy into a lifestyle, not just individual items, but our customers come here specifically for the products." I pointed out, they want to see new arrivals from local artisans, learn about the makers behind the pieces, understand the quality and craftsmanship that goes into each item. "Right, but that's so literal," Chloe said, still photographing herself. "You could tell those same stories through lifestyle content. Show how the pieces fit into an aspirational coastal living aesthetic." "Aspirational coastal living aesthetic?" I watched Chloe pose with a hand-forged copper bracelet, holding it up to catch the light while making what she probably thought was a candid expression. She was treating my boutique like a backdrop for her personal brand rather than a business built on genuine relationships and quality products. The bell above the door chimed, and Mrs. Rivera entered carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. She'd been my very first customer 5 years ago, buying a set of beeswax candles for her daughter's birthday. Since then, she'd become a regular, stopping by every few days to chat and see what new items had arrived. "Good morning, Layla," she said warmly, then paused as she noticed Chloe behind the counter. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company, Mrs. Rivera. I'd like you to meet Chloe," I said. "She's Derek's sister, and she's learning about the business." "How lovely," Mrs. Rivera said, offering Chloe a genuine smile. "Are you thinking about opening your own shop?" "Actually, I'm going to be taking over this one," Chloe said, her voice carrying a note of pride that made my stomach clench. "Layla is giving me the boutique as a wedding gift." Mrs. Rivera's smile faltered slightly. "Taking over? But Layla, you've worked so hard to build this place. It's a family thing," I said quickly, shooting Chloe a warning look. "We're just exploring possibilities right now." But Chloe was already warming to her theme. "I'm so excited to bring some fresh energy to this space," she said, gesturing around the shop. "There's so much potential here that hasn't been fully realized." "Potential?" Mrs. Rivera's voice carried a sharp edge that I'd never heard before. "This boutique is perfect exactly as it is. Layla has created something special here, a place where you can find unique, beautiful things made by local artists. What more potential could there be?" "Oh, I don't mean to criticize what Layla has done," Chloe said quickly, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I just think there are opportunities to expand the brand. Maybe bring in some more contemporary pieces, update the overall aesthetic to appeal to a broader customer base." "Contemporary pieces?" Mrs. Rivera repeated slowly. "You mean mass-produced items instead of handmade ones?" "Well, not necessarily mass-produced," Chloe backtracked, "but maybe some wholesale items that could increase profit margins. And definitely more social media marketing to reach younger demographics." Mrs. Rivera looked from Chloe to me, her expression a mixture of concern and barely contained anger. "Layla dear, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" I followed her to the textile display, where she pretended to examine a hand-woven scarf while speaking in a low, urgent voice. "That girl has no idea what this place means to this community," she said. "She's talking about it like it's some kind of lifestyle brand instead of a business that supports local artists and provides something unique to our town." "I know," I said softly. "That's why we're taking the training process slowly. I want to make sure she understands what she'd be taking on, and if she doesn't." I glanced back at Chloe, who was now taking more selfies with different products. "Then I think the decision will make itself." Mrs. Rivera squeezed my arm. "You've built something precious here. Layla, don't let anyone pressure you into giving it away to someone who doesn't appreciate its value." After Mrs. Rivera left with her usual purchase of beeswax candles, I returned to find Chloe scrolling through her phone, apparently researching wholesale suppliers. "I found this amazing company that does coastal-themed home decor," she said excitedly. "They have minimum orders of only $500. And their profit margins are way better than what you're getting from these local artisans." "Chloe, the whole point of Coastal Bloom is to support local artists and provide unique, handmade items," I said patiently. "Our customers come here specifically because they can't find these pieces anywhere else. But think about how much more money you could make," she pressed. "Instead of taking a 30% commission on a $28 mug, you could buy wholesale mugs for $4 and sell them for $16. That's a 300% markup instead of 30%. The fact that she'd calculated the numbers so quickly told me she'd been thinking about this since yesterday's lunch. She'd spent less than 24 hours learning about my business. And she was already planning to replace handmade local products with mass-produced wholesale items. "The profit margins aren't the only consideration," I said. "We're building relationships with local artists, supporting the community, providing customers with unique pieces that have stories behind them. Stories don't pay the bills," Chloe said with a laugh that was probably meant to sound lighthearted but came across as dismissive. "I mean, it's sweet that you want to help local artists, but this is a business, not a charity." "A business, not a charity." I felt something cold settle in my chest as I realized just how fundamentally Chloe misunderstood everything I built. To her, the relationships with artisans were unnecessary overhead. The focus on quality was inefficient. And the connection to community was just feel-good marketing rather than the core of what made Koa's Tall Bloom special. You know what, I said, forcing my voice to remain calm. Why don't we focus on learning the existing business model before we start planning changes? That way, you'll have a complete understanding of how everything works before you start optimizing. Of course, Chloe said, though her tone suggested she thought this was unnecessarily cautious. But I'm just saying, there are definitely opportunities for improvement. The bell chimed again. And Tessa walked in carrying a paper bag that smelled like bacon and fresh bread. She took one look at Chloe posing for another selfie and raised an eyebrow at me. Morning, Layla, she said, her voice carefully neutral. I brought you some breakfast from the truck. Thought you might need extra fuel for your training session. You're an angel, I said, grateful for the interruption. Chloe. This is my best friend Tessa. She runs the food truck that parks down by the marina. Oh, how fun, Chloe said, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I love food trucks. So trendy and authentic. Tessa's expression remained carefully blank. Authentic, right? I was just telling Layla about some ideas I have for updating this place. Chloe continued, apparently oblivious to the tension in the air. There's so much potential to modernize the brand and increase profitability. Modernize, Tessa repeated slowly. What exactly did you have in mind? Well, for starters, some of these price points are pretty high for what you're getting, Chloe said, gesturing toward Elena's pottery display. I mean, $28 for a coffee mug. You could get a whole set at HomeGoods for that price. The silence that followed was deafening. Tessa's expression shifted from neutral to dangerous. And I found myself holding my breath as I waited for her response. You know, Tessa said finally, her voice deceptively calm, I've been buying Elena's pottery for 3 years now. I have a full set of her dinnerware, and every piece is still perfect, no chips, no cracks, no fading. My grandmother's china that cost 10 times as much didn't hold up half as well. I'm sure the quality is fine, Chloe said quickly. I just meant from a business perspective. From a business perspective, Tessa interrupted. Layla has built something that matters. People don't come here just to buy stuff. They come here to connect with their community, to support local artists, to find pieces that nobody else has. You can't put a price on that. Of course not, Chloe said, but her tone suggested she thought Tessa was being unnecessarily sentimental. I'm just saying there might be ways to serve the community while also maximizing revenue. By replacing handmade local products with mass-produced wholesale items, Tessa asked, her voice getting sharper. That's not serving the community. That's turning this place into every other generic boutique in every other tourist town. Chloe's cheeks flushed slightly. I never said anything about replacing everything. Just maybe adding some complementary items that could improve the profit margins. The profit margins are fine, I said firmly. Coastal Bloom is successful precisely because we offer something different. Our customers trust us to curate unique, quality pieces that they can't find anywhere else. I understand that, Chloe said, though her expression suggested she thought I was being unnecessarily rigid. I'm just trying to think strategically about growth opportunities. Maybe you should focus on understanding what already works before you start planning changes, Tessa suggested, her tone making it clear that this wasn't really a suggestion. After Tessa left, Chloe seemed subdued. She went through the motions of learning about inventory management and customer service, but I could tell her enthusiasm had dimmed considerably. The reality of retail work, the attention to detail, the focus on relationships over pure profit, the physical demands of being on your feet all day was clearly not what she'd expected. By noon, she was checking her phone every few minutes, and had already asked twice when we'd be taking a lunch break. Her white jeans were showing dust from the storage room, and she'd developed a slight limp from her impractical shoes. This is a lot more involved than I thought it would be, she admitted as we processed a shipment of new jewelry from one of our artisans. Most businesses are, I said, carefully logging each piece in our inventory system. That's why the training period is so important. I want to make sure you're completely prepared before taking over. How long did you say this training would take again? 3 to 6 months, depending on how quickly you master each aspect of the business. Chloe was quiet for a moment, And I could practically see her mind working, you know. She said finally, maybe it would be better if I started after the wedding. I'm so busy with planning right now, and I want to be able to give this my full attention. That's probably wise. I agreed. Running a business requires total commitment, especially in the beginning, plus it might be good to wait until after the honeymoon, she continued. Theo and I are going to Europe for 3 weeks, and I wouldn't want to start something new and then have to take time off immediately. Absolutely, I said. Consistency is crucial in retail. Customers need to know they can rely on you to be here. By the time Chloe left at 2 o'clock claiming she had a dress-fitting appointment, I could see the wheels turning in her head. The reality of actually running Coastal Bloom was clearly more work than she'd anticipated, and she was already looking for ways to delay or avoid the commitment. I spent the rest of the afternoon alone in the boutique, serving customers and thinking about what I'd observed. Chloe's true priorities had become crystal clear. She wanted the prestige of owning a successful business without the effort of actually running one. She saw my carefully curated collection of handmade items as inefficient overhead, my relationships with local artisans as unnecessary complications, and my focus on quality and community as obstacles to profit maximization. But most telling of all, she'd revealed that she didn't understand or value what made Coastal Bloom special. In her mind, it was just another retail space that could be optimized for better profit margins. She had no appreciation for the years of work I'd put into building relationships with artisans, the careful curation that kept customers coming back, or the way the boutique had become a gathering place for people who valued handmade, unique items. As I locked up that evening, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Vivian's contact. It was time to review those conditional transfer documents and make sure they were airtight, because if Chloe was going to inherit my life's work, she was going to have to prove she understood what she was asking for, and based on today's performance, that was looking increasingly unlikely. Part 4, The Fiance's Doubts. 2 days after Chloe's disastrous training session, I was arranging a new display of sea glass jewelry when my phone buzzed with an unexpected text. Hi Layla, this is Theo. Would you have time for coffee this afternoon? I'd like to talk to you about something. I stared at the message for a long moment, surprised by the contact. The fact that she'd calculated the numbers so quickly told me she'd been thinking about this since yesterday's lunch. She'd spent less than 24 hours learning about my business, and she was already planning to replace handmade local products with mass-produced wholesale items. The profit margins aren't the only consideration, I said. We're building relationships with local artists, supporting the community, providing customers with unique pieces that have stories behind them. Stories don't pay the bills, Chloe said with a laugh that was probably meant to sound lighthearted but came across as dismissive. I mean, it's sweet that you want to help local artists, but this is a business, not a charity. A business, not a charity. I felt something cold settle in my chest as I realized just how fundamentally Chloe misunderstood everything I built. To her, the relationships with artisans were unnecessary overhead, the focus on quality was inefficient, and the connection to community was just feel-good marketing rather than the core of what made Coastal Bloom special. You know what, I said, forcing my voice to remain calm. Why don't we focus on learning the existing business model before we start planning changes? That way, you'll have a complete understanding of how everything works before you start optimizing. Of course, Chloe said, though her tone suggested she thought this was unnecessarily cautious. But I'm just saying, there are definitely opportunities for improvement. The bell chimed again, and Tessa walked in carrying a paper bag that smelled like bacon and fresh bread. She took one look at Chloe posing for another selfie and raised an eyebrow at me. Morning, Layla, she said, her voice carefully neutral. I brought you some breakfast from the truck. Thought you might need extra fuel for your training session. You're an angel, I said, grateful for the interruption. Chloe, this is my best friend Tessa. She runs the food truck that parks down by the marina. Oh, how fun, Chloe said, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I love food trucks. So trendy and authentic. Tessa's expression remained carefully blank. Authentic, right? I was just telling Layla about some ideas I have for updating this place, Chloe continued, apparently oblivious to the tension in the air. There's so much potential to modernize the brand and increase profitability. Modernize, Tessa repeated slowly. What exactly did you have in mind? Well, for starters, some of these price points are pretty high for what you're getting, Chloe said, gesturing toward Elena's pottery display. I mean, $28 for a coffee mug. You could get a whole set at HomeGoods for that price. The silence that followed was deafening. Tessa's expression shifted from neutral to dangerous, and I found myself holding my breath as I waited for her response. You know, Tessa said finally, her voice deceptively calm, I've been buying Elena's pottery for 3 years now. I have a full set of her dinnerware, and every piece is still perfect, no chips. No cracks, no fading. My grandmother's china that costs 10 times as much didn't hold up half as well. I'm sure the quality is fine, Chloe said quickly. I just meant from a business perspective. From a business perspective, Tessa interrupted. Layla has built something that matters. People don't come here just to buy stuff. They come here to connect with their community, to support local artists, to find pieces that nobody else has. You can't put a price on that, of course not, Chloe said, but her tone suggested she thought Tessa was being unnecessarily sentimental. I'm just saying there might be ways to serve the community while also maximizing revenue. By replacing handmade local products with mass-produced wholesale items, Tessa asked, her voice getting sharper. That's not serving the community. That's turning this place into every other generic boutique in every other tourist town. Chloe's cheeks flushed slightly. I never said anything about replacing everything. Just maybe adding some complementary items that could improve the profit margins. The profit margins are fine, I said firmly. Coastal Bloom is successful precisely because we offer something different. Our customers trust us to curate unique, quality pieces that they can't find anywhere else. I understand that, Chloe said, though her expression suggested she thought I was being unnecessarily rigid. I'm just trying to think strategically about growth opportunities. Maybe you should focus on understanding what already works before you start planning changes, Tessa suggested, her tone making it clear that this wasn't really a suggestion. After Tessa left, Chloe seemed subdued. She went through the motions of learning about inventory management and customer service, but I could tell her enthusiasm had dimmed considerably. The reality of retail work, the attention to detail, the focus on relationships over pure profit, the physical demands of being on your feet all day was clearly not what she'd expected. By noon, she was checking her phone every few minutes, and had already asked twice when we'd be taking a lunch break. Her white jeans were showing dust from the storage room, and she developed a slight limp from her impractical shoes. This is a lot more involved than I thought it would be, she admitted as we processed a shipment of new jewelry from one of our artisans. Most businesses are, I said, carefully logging each piece in our inventory system. That's why the training period is so important. I want to make sure you're completely prepared before taking over. How long did you say this training would take again? 3 to 6 months, depending on how quickly you master each aspect of the business. Chloe was quiet for a moment, and I could practically see her mind working, you know. She said finally, maybe it would be better if I started after the wedding. I'm so busy with planning right now, and I want to be able to give this my full attention. That's probably wise, I agreed. Running a business requires total commitment, especially in the beginning. Plus, it might be good to wait until after the honeymoon, she continued. Theo and I are going to Europe for 3 weeks, and I wouldn't want to start something new and then have to take time off immediately. Absolutely, I said. Consistency is crucial in retail. Customers need to know they can rely on you to be here. By the time Chloe left at 2 o'clock claiming she had a dress-fitting appointment, I could see the wheels turning in her head. The reality of actually running Coastal Bloom was clearly more work than she'd anticipated, and she was already looking for ways to delay or avoid the commitment. I spent the rest of the afternoon alone in the boutique, serving customers and thinking about what I'd observed. Chloe's true priorities had become crystal clear. She wanted the prestige of owning a successful business without the effort of actually running one. She saw my carefully curated collection of handmade items as inefficient overhead, my relationships with local artisans as unnecessary complications, and my focus on quality and community as obstacles to profit maximization. But most telling of all, she'd revealed that she didn't understand or value what made Coastal Bloom special. In her mind, it was just another retail space that could be optimized for better profit margins. She had no appreciation for the years of work I'd put into building relationships with artisans, the careful curation that kept customers coming back, or the way the boutique had become a gathering place for people who valued handmade, unique items. As I locked up that evening, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Vivian's contact. It was time to review those conditional transfer documents and make sure they were airtight, because if Chloe was going to inherit my life's work, she was going to have to prove she understood what she was asking for, and based on today's performance, that was looking increasingly unlikely. Part 4, The Fiance's Doubts. 2 days after Chloe's disastrous training session, I was arranging a new display of sea-glass jewelry when my phone buzzed with an unexpected text. "Hi Layla, this is Theo. Would you have time for coffee this afternoon? I'd like to talk to you about something." I stared at the message for a long moment, surprised by the contact. But another part of me thinks maybe I owe it to what we used to have to give her a chance to prove me wrong. And if she doesn't, then I guess we both learned something important before it was too late. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "How did training go with Chloe today?" She said it was really educational. I showed the message to Theo, who smiled grimly. "She's been telling everyone how much she's learning about business operations. But when I ask her specific questions about what she learned, she just talks about optimization opportunities. She lasted about 4 hours on her first day," I said, "and spent most of that time taking selfies and complaining about the pricing structure." "That sounds about right." Theo pulled out his wallet and left money on the table for both our coffees. "Layla, can I ask a favor?" "What kind of favor?" "Don't make this easy for her. Whatever training requirements you've set up, whatever evaluations you're planning, don't lower the bar just because she's family. If she's going to inherit something you've spent 5 years building, make her prove she deserves it." "I can promise you that," I said. "But Theo, what if this ruins things between her and Derek's family? What if they blame me for not being generous enough? Then they never deserved your generosity in the first place," he said firmly. "And maybe it's time they learn the difference between supporting family and enabling entitlement." As we prepared to leave, Theo hesitated at the door. "There's one more thing I should probably tell you." "What's that?" "Chloe has been talking to a lawyer about the business transfer. She wants to make sure there are no legal complications if she decides to make significant changes to the operation." "What kind of changes?" "The kind that would let her restructure everything without needing your input or approval. She specifically asked about her rights as the new owner to modify vendor contracts, change product lines, and relocate the business." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Chloe wasn't just planning to change my business, she was making sure she had the legal right to do whatever she wanted with it, regardless of my objections or the impact on the artists and customers who depended on Coastal Bloom. "Theo, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay, do you think Chloe sees this as a gift, or as an acquisition?" He was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the kind of careful attention I was beginning to recognize as characteristic of him. "I think she sees it as an opportunity," he said finally, "and I'm not sure she particularly cares whether you meant it as a gift or not." That evening, I sat in my kitchen with Vivian's conditional transfer documents spread across the table, reviewing every clause and provision in light of what Theo had revealed. The contract was thorough, but I wasn't sure it was thorough enough to protect against someone who was actively planning to circumvent its spirit while technically complying with its letter. My phone rang, and Derek's name appeared on the screen. "Hey honey," he said, his voice warm with satisfaction. "I just talked to Chloe, and she's so excited about the training process. She said you're being incredibly thorough and professional about everything." "I'm trying to be," I said carefully. She also mentioned that she's been doing some research on business optimization strategies. "I think it's great that she's taking such initiative." Business optimization strategies. I wondered if Derek had any idea what that phrase actually meant in Chloe's context. "Derek, can I ask you something?" "Of course. When you first suggested giving the boutique to Chloe, what did you envision happening? Did you see her running it exactly as I have, or did you expect her to make changes?" Derek was quiet for a moment. "I guess I assumed she'd put her own stamp on it," he said finally, "make it reflect her style and vision." "Why do you ask?" "Just curious about your expectations." "Is everything okay? You sound a little tense." I looked down at the contract documents, thinking about Chloe's wholesale supplier research and her conversations with real estate agents and lawyers. "Everything's fine." I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about what this transfer involves, of course. And Layla, I really appreciate how patient you're being with the whole process. I know this isn't easy for you. After Derek hung up, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Vivian, asking her to strengthen the conditional transfer agreement, with additional protections for the boutique's location, vendor relationships, and community mission. The second was to Tessa, asking her to meet me at the boutique early the next morning. Because if Chloe wanted to play games with my life's work, she was going to discover that I knew how to play them too, and unlike her, I had 5 years of experience, understanding exactly what was at stake. The only question now was whether Theo would have the courage to see his fiancée's true character clearly enough to act on what he'd learned, and whether Derek would recognize the difference between supporting his sister's dreams and enabling her to destroy mine. The dinner invitation came through Derek, delivered with the kind of casual authority that suggested it wasn't really a request. My parents want to have us over Sunday night, he said, not looking up from his laptop as he spoke. They're excited to celebrate the boutique transfer and want to discuss some ideas they have for help. In Chloe Get Started, I paused in folding laundry, a hand-woven dish towel from one of my artisans still in my hands. Ideas. Just family stuff, Derek said, finally glancing up with the distracted smile he wore when he was juggling multiple conversations. You know how they are about big family milestones. They want to make sure everything goes smoothly. What I knew about Derek's parents was that they approached family milestones the way military strategists approached campaigns, with detailed planning, clear objectives, and an expectation that everyone would fall in line with the established hierarchy. Mrs. Whitmore had planned Chloe's engagement party like a corporate product launch, complete with themed decorations and a carefully orchestrated guest list designed to maximize social impact. Will Chloe and Theo be there? I asked. Of course, it's really a celebration dinner for them. Derek closed his laptop and stretched, apparently satisfied that he'd handled the logistics. My mom's making her famous lamb roast, and I think she's planning to break out the good china. She's really excited about welcoming a new entrepreneur into the family. A new entrepreneur, as if Chloe had spent years building something from nothing, rather than inheriting a fully operational business through family connections. But that was how the Whitmores operated. They redefined circumstances to fit their preferred narrative, then treated that narrative as established fact. Sunday evening arrived gray and windy, with the kind of coastal weather that sent tourists scurrying indoors and made locals grateful for warm, well-lit houses. The Whitmore family home sat on a bluff overlooking the harbor, its expansive windows and manicured landscaping a testament to 3 generations of successful real estate development. Mrs. Whitmore answered the door wearing the kind of effortless elegance that came from a lifetime of country club dinners and charity galas. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her jewelry understated but expensive, and her smile carried the practiced warmth of someone accustomed to hosting important occasions. Layla, darling, she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled of expensive perfume and hairspray, we're so proud of what you're doing for Chloe. It's exactly the kind of family generosity we've always valued. Family generosity, the phrase landed like a weight in my chest, transforming my potential sacrifice into a family virtue and making any reluctance on my part seem selfish by comparison. It's important to support each other, I said carefully, allowing myself to be guided into the living room where Mr. Whitmore was arranging glasses on the bar cart. Absolutely, he boomed, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. Plus, we'd love to have everything settled before the wedding, Mrs. Whitmore added. It would make such a lovely addition to the ceremony, having Chloe officially recognized as a business owner. Before the wedding, which was less than 3 weeks away, they were expecting me to hand over my life's work in time for it to be announced at Chloe's wedding reception, turning my sacrifice into part of their family celebration. I'm not sure that timeline is realistic, I said carefully. There are legal requirements, evaluation criteria, training benchmarks that need to be completed properly. What kind of evaluation criteria? Mrs. Whitmore asked, her tone sharpening slightly. Standard business transfer protocols, I said, grateful for Vivian's legal expertise. Competency assessments, financial planning requirements, community integration, standards, nothing unusual, just thorough due diligence to protect everyone involved. That seems unnecessarily complicated, Mr. Whitmore said. This is a family gift. not a corporate acquisition. Even family gifts require proper documentation, I replied. Especially when they involve ongoing business relationships and financial responsibilities. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Derek's parents exchanged a look that I couldn't quite interpret. But it carried the weight of silent communication between people who'd been married for 30 years. Of course we want everything done properly, Mrs. Whitmore said, her voice regaining its practiced warmth. We just don't want unnecessary bureaucracy to delay what should be a joyful family milestone. Unnecessary bureaucracy, another reframing. Turning my reasonable business protections into obstacles to family harmony. I think Layla's being very responsible, Theo said quietly, speaking for the first time since we'd sat down. A business transfer of this magnitude deserves careful planning and evaluation. The look Chloe shot him was sharp enough to cut glass. Theo, this is a family matter, and I'm going to be family, he replied evenly, which means I have an interest in making sure everyone's treated fairly. Everyone is being treated fairly, Mrs. Whitmore said, her tone suggesting that questioning this assumption was inappropriate. Layla is making a generous gift to help Chloe start her married life, and we're all supporting that decision, are we, though? Theo asked, his voice still quiet but carrying an edge I hadn't heard before. Supporting it, I mean, or are we pressuring Layla to make a sacrifice she's not comfortable with for the sake of what we've decided is family loyalty? The silence that followed was profound. Derek looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Chloe's face was flushed with anger, and her parents wore expressions of polite shock, as if Theo had committed some unforgivable breach of etiquette. I think there might be a misunderstanding, Mr. Whitmore said finally, his voice carrying the kind of careful control that suggested he was working hard to remain diplomatic. No one is pressuring anyone. This was Derek's idea and Layla has graciously agreed to consider it. Has she, though? Theo pressed. Agreed, I mean, or has she just been too polite to say no to something her husband's family really wants her to do? Theo, Chloe hissed, her voice low and furious. Stop, but he didn't stop. Instead, he turned to look directly at me, his expression serious and strangely gentle. Layla, can I ask you something? And will you give me an honest answer? Theo, that's enough, Derek said, finally finding his voice. This is a family dinner, not an interrogation. It's okay, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. What did you want to ask? If Derek had never made this request, if his family had never suggested it, would you choose to give your business to Chloe? Not because you felt obligated. Not because it would make everyone happy, but because you genuinely believed it was the right thing to do. The question hung in the air like a challenge, stripping away all the careful framing and polite euphemisms to expose the raw truth underneath. Everyone at the table was staring at me, waiting for my answer. I looked around the table at Derek's hopeful face, at Chloe's entitled expectation, at the senior Whitmore's practiced confidence that their family's desires would ultimately prevail. Then I looked at Theo, who was watching me with the kind of careful attention that suggested he already knew what my honest answer would be. No, I said quietly, I wouldn't. The word fell into the silence like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock and displeasure around the table. Derek's face went pale, Chloe's mouth dropped open, and Mrs. Whitmore's carefully maintained composure cracked just enough to reveal the steel underneath. Well, she said finally, her voice carrying a chill that had nothing to do with the coastal wind. I think we all know where we stand now. The rest of the dinner passed in strained politeness, with conversation limited to safe topics like the weather and local news, but the damage was done. I'd said the quiet part out loud, admitting that I didn't want to give up my business and was only considering it because of family pressure. As we prepared to leave, Mrs. Whitmore pulled me aside while Derek retrieved our coats. Layla dear, she said, her voice low and intense, I hope you'll reconsider your position. Family relationships are precious things, and they can be damaged by selfishness. I understand, I said. I'm not sure you do, she continued. Derek loves you, but he also loves his sister, and Chloe has been looking forward to this opportunity for weeks now. If you back out now, it won't just disappoint her, it will embarrass our entire family. The threat was delicately delivered but unmistakable. Choose the family, or lose the family. I'm not backing out, I said carefully. I'm just ensuring the process is handled properly. Good, Mrs. Whitmore said, her smile returning with practiced ease. because we'd hate for anything to come between Derek and the family he loves. On the drive home, Derek was quiet, his hands tight on the steering wheel as he navigated the dark coastal roads. Finally, as we pulled into our driveway, he spoke. "Why did you say that?" he asked, not looking at me. "About not wanting to give Chloe the business?" "Because it's the truth," I said, and Theo asked for honesty. "But you agreed to do it." "I agreed to consider it. There's a difference." Derek turned off the engine and sat in the dark car for a moment. And I could see him struggling with something. "Layla, I need you to understand something," he said finally. "This isn't just about Chloe anymore. My parents have been telling everyone about your generous gift. It was mentioned in the wedding announcements, and my mom has been bragging about it too. All her friends. If you back out now, it will embarrass the family." I finished. "Your mother already explained that. It's not just about embarrassment," Derek said, though his tone suggested that it mostly was. "It's about what kind of family we want to be. The kind that supports each other, or the kind that makes promises they don't keep." I sat in the dark car, listening to the engine tick as it cooled, and realized that Derek's family had effectively trapped me. By announcing my generosity before I'd actually agreed to anything, they'd created social pressure that made backing out seem like a betrayal rather than a reasonable business decision. "Derek," I said carefully, "what if I go through with the evaluation process and Chloe doesn't meet the requirements? What if she's genuinely not ready to run the business? Then I guess we'll cross that bridge when we come to it," he said. "But Layla, I really hope it doesn't come to that. I hope you'll find a way to make this work." As we walked into our house, I realized that Derek wasn't asking me to make a generous gift to his sister. He was asking me to sacrifice my business to preserve his family's reputation and his own position within their hierarchy. The question was whether I was willing to pay that price, or whether I was finally ready to make them face the true cost of what they were asking for. 3 days after the disastrous family dinner, I stood in my boutique at dawn, watching the harbor come alive with fishing boats and early morning joggers. The familiar routine of opening the shop, checking displays, counting the register, ranging new arrivals usually centered me, but this morning felt different. This morning felt like preparation for war. My phone buzzed with a text from Tessa. Coffee truck parked outside, brought reinforcements and a battle plan. I unlocked the front door to find Tessa wheeling in a cart loaded with coffee, pastries, and what appeared to be a small army's worth of planning materials. Behind her, Vivian followed with a leather portfolio that looked serious enough to intimidate opposing counsel. "Emergency strategy session," Tessa announced, setting up camp at the reading corner. "Vivian's been working on something that's going to make your day. Actually, it's going to make your month," Vivian corrected, settling into the velvet armchair, with the satisfied expression of a chess master about to reveal checkmate. "I've been thinking about your Chloe problem, and I believe I have a solution." "What kind of solution?" Vivian opened her portfolio and spread out a series of documents. "You said Chloe wants to prove she's ready to run this business, so we're going to give her that opportunity." "I'm already doing that with the training process." "No, you're giving her controlled exposure under your supervision," Vivian corrected. "What I'm proposing is giving her a real test, a public demonstration of her capabilities, where she can't rely on your guidance or fall back on family connections." Tessa leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. "What did you have in mind?" "A bachelorette party," Vivian said simply. I stared at her. "A what?" "Think about it," Vivian continued, clearly enjoying my confusion. "Chloe's getting married in 2 weeks. She's going to want some kind of bachelorette celebration. And what could be more perfect than hosting it at the boutique she's about to inherit?" "But that would just be a party," I said, "not a business demonstration. Not if we structure it properly." Vivian pulled out a detailed plan that looked like it had been drafted by a military strategist. "We position it as a private shopping event for Chloe and her friends, a chance for her to showcase her knowledge of the products, demonstrate her customer service skills, and prove she understands what makes Coastal Bloom special." Tessa was grinning now. "You want to make her work her own bachelorette party?" "Exactly. And we'll invite people who matter: local press, community leaders, longtime customers, other business owners, people who understand what this boutique represents and can evaluate whether Chloe truly grasps its significance." I felt a slow smile spreading across my face as I began to understand the brilliance of Vivian's plan. If she succeeds, she'll have proven herself publicly, and if she fails, she'll expose her incompetence in front of everyone who matters, Vivian finished. Either way, the community will have a clear picture of what's really happening here. But how do we make sure she agrees to it? I asked. That's the beautiful part, Tessa said. Pulling out her phone, we don't ask her to agree, we offer it. As a gift, within an hour, we had the plan mapped out in detail. I would approach Chloe with an offer to host a special pre-wedding celebration at the boutique, a chance for her to introduce herself to the community as the incoming owner and demonstrate her vision for the business's future. We'd frame it as a generous gesture from me, a way to help her transition into her new role with community support and recognition. The guest list would include Mrs. Rivera and other loyal customers, local artists whose work I carried, business owners from the Boardwalk Association, and most importantly Sarah Chen, the lifestyle reporter for the Coastal Weekly who'd written several articles about small businesses in the area. The key is to make it look completely legitimate, Vivian explained as we finalized the details. Nothing about this can seem like sabotage. We're simply giving Chloe an opportunity to shine. And if she doesn't shine, I asked, then that's her choice, not our manipulation, Vivian said firmly. We're not setting her up to fail, we're setting up a situation where success requires actual compet. In some genuine understanding of what you've built here. At noon, I called Chloe with our offer. Her enthusiasm was immediate and overwhelming. Oh my God, Layla, that's such an amazing idea, she gushed, her voice carrying the kind of excitement usually reserved for surprise parties and designer sale notifications. A private shopping event at the boutique would be so perfect for my bachelorette celebration, much more sophisticated than some tacky bar crawl. I thought you might enjoy it, I said. Making notes as we talked, we could invite some key people from the community, customers, local business owners, maybe even get some press coverage to help introduce you as the new owner. Press coverage? That would be incredible. I've been wanting to update the boutique's media presence anyway. This could be the perfect launch for my new brand vision, her new brand vision. I made another note, wondering what Chloe imagined that phrase meant. So you're thinking this Saturday? She continued, that gives me time to plan something really spectacular. I'm already envisioning the Instagram potential. Saturday works perfectly. I agreed, I'll handle the guest list and logistics. You just focus on preparing to showcase your knowledge of the business and your vision for its future. This is going to be so fun, Chloe said, finally. A chance to show everyone what Coastal Bloom could become with the right leadership. After we hung up, I sat in the boutique's quiet afternoon atmosphere and wondered if I was making a terrible mistake. There was still a chance, however slim, that Chloe would rise to the occasion and prove me wrong about her character and capabilities. If that happened, I'd have publicly validated her takeover of my business and made it impossible to back out without looking petty and vindictive. But as I thought about her immediate focus on Instagram potential and brand vision, I felt increasingly confident that Saturday would reveal exactly who Chloe really was and what she really understood about running a business like Coastal Bloom. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. I reached out to my network of customers, artists, and local business owners, positioning the event as a celebration of the boutique's future and an opportunity to meet its incoming owner. The response was overwhelmingly positive, though I caught undertones of concern from people who'd grown to love Coastal Bloom exactly as it was. I hope this new owner understands what makes this place special, Mrs. Rivera said when I called to invite her. It would be such a shame if it became just another generic tourist shop. I'm sure Chloe will do her best to honor what we've built here, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Sarah Chen from the Coastal Weekly was particularly interested. I've been following the trend of family business transfers in the area, she said. It's always fascinating to see how the next generation adapts established enterprises to contemporary markets. I wondered if Sarah had any idea what Chloe's idea of contemporary adaptation involved. By Friday evening, everything was in place. The guest list included 23 people who represented the heart of Coastal Bloom's community: loyal customers, local artists, fellow business owners, and Sarah with her notebook and camera. I'd arranged for light refreshments and had prepared a brief introduction that would position the evening as Chloe's opportunity to share her vision for the boutique's future. The only wild card was Theo. When I'd mentioned the event to him during a brief encounter at the coffee shop, His expression had been unreadable. Should be interesting, he'd said, his tone carefully neutral. I assume you want me to be there. Only if you're comfortable with it, I'd replied. But I think it might be good for Chloe to have your support, my support, he'd repeated. And something in his voice suggested he was working through implications. I couldn't quite grasp. Yes, I think I should definitely be there. Saturday afternoon arrived gray and blustery, with the kind of weather that made the boutique's warm lighting and cozy atmosphere feel especially inviting. I spent the day setting up, arranging displays to showcase our best pieces and preparing information cards about each of the artisans, whose work we carried. At 5 o'clock, Chloe arrived in a whirlwind of energy and expensive perfume, wearing a white dress that was clearly chosen for its photogenic qualities rather than its practicality. For a working event, this is going to be perfect, she announced, immediately beginning to rearrange displays in ways that would provide better backdrops for photos. I've been preparing all week, and I have so many ideas to share with everyone. What kind of ideas? I asked, watching her move a carefully balanced jewelry display to a spot where the lighting was more flattering. Oh, you'll see, she said with a secretive smile. Let's just say I've been doing my research on contemporary boutique management, and I think people are going to be very excited about the direction I'm planning to take things. At 5:30, the guests began to arrive. Mrs. Rivera came first, bringing flowers from her stand and wearing the kind of dress she reserved for church and special occasions. The local artists followed Elena with pottery samples to show Chloe, Marcus with a new scarf design he'd been working on, and several others whose livelihoods depended on the boutique's continued success. Sarah Chen arrived fashionably late, her camera and notebook suggesting she was prepared to document whatever happened. She immediately began circulating through the crowd, asking questions about the boutique's history and the community's feelings about the ownership transfer. By 6 o'clock, the boutique was filled with conversation and the warm energy of people who genuinely cared about Coastal Bloom's future. I watched Chloe work the room, accepting congratulations and posing for photos with various guests, and had to admit she looked the part of a successful young entrepreneur. The test would come when she had to demonstrate actual knowledge and genuine understanding of what she was inheriting. At 6:30, I called for everyone's attention and introduced Chloe as the boutique's incoming owner. The applause was polite but measured, and I could see people evaluating her with the careful attention of a community that had invested emotional energy in Coastal Bloom's success. Thank you all so much for being here, Chloe began, her voice carrying the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to public attention. I'm so excited to share my vision for Coastal Bloom's future and to hear your thoughts about how we can work together to take this amazing business to the next level too. The next level. I caught Mrs. Rivera's slight frown at the phrase and felt my stomach tighten with anticipation. First, I want to acknowledge everything Layla has accomplished here, Chloe continued, gesturing toward me with the kind of gracious smile that managed to be both appreciative and slightly condescending. She's built something really special, and I'm honored to be trusted with carrying it forward. The crowd murmured approvingly, and I saw several people relax slightly. Perhaps Chloe would surprise everyone. That said, she continued, and I felt the mood in the room shift subtly. I think there are incredible opportunities to expand on what's already been established here, to reach new markets, embrace contemporary retail strategies, and really maximize the potential of this beautiful space. What kind of contemporary strategies? Asked David Martinez, who owned the bookstore 3 doors down and had been watching local retail trends for 15 years. Chloe's smile brightened clearly, excited to share her plans. Well, for starters, I think we need to be more strategic about inventory management. Right now, we're carrying products from over 40 different local artists, which creates logistical complications and limits our ability to maintain consistent profit margins. A murmur went through the crowd, and I saw Elena's face go pale. My plan is to streamline that to maybe 8 to 10 core vendors who can provide consistent quality and reliable delivery schedules, Chloe continued, apparently oblivious to the growing tension in the room. That will allow us to negotiate better wholesale prices and maintain more predictable inventory levels. What happens to the other 30 vendors? Marcus asked, his voice carefully controlled. Well, obviously we'd transition gradually, Chloe said, her tone suggesting this was a perfectly reasonable business decision. We'd keep the most popular items and help the other artisans find alternative sales channels. It's really about focusing on what works best for the business. The silence that followed was profound. I watched 23 people process the fact that Chloe's first priority was to eliminate 2/3 of the local artists who depended on Coastal Bloom, replacing their handmade work with more commercially viable alternatives. Sarah Chen was taking notes furiously, her expression suggesting she understood exactly what story was unfolding in front of her. What about the community relationships? Mrs. Rivera asked, her voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. Half the reason people shop here is because they know they're supporting local artists and craftspeople. Oh, we definitely maintain that messaging, Chloe assured her. But we can tell those same stories with a more curated selection of vendors. Sometimes less is more, you know? But if you're eliminating most of the local artists, what stories would you be telling? Sarah asked, her pen poised over her notebook. Chloe hesitated for just a moment, and I realized she hadn't thought through the logical implications of her own plan. Well, we'd focus on the stories that resonate most with customers, she said. Finally, the ones that create the strongest emotional connection to the brand. The brand, not the community, not the artists, not the relationships that had taken 5 years to build. The brand. Can you tell us about some of the artists whose work you're planning to keep? Elena asked, her voice tight with barely controlled anxiety. Absolutely, Chloe said confidently. For example, we definitely want to continue carrying. She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd as if looking for inspiration. The pottery, of course. That's such a core part of the coastal aesthetic. Whose pottery? Elena pressed. Another pause, longer this time. I watched Chloe realize that she couldn't remember Elena's name, despite having been introduced to her multiple times during the training process. Your pottery, Chloe said finally, gesturing vaguely in Elena's direction. It's exactly the kind of authentic local craftsmanship that fits the brand vision. Elena's expression hardened, and I saw her exchange a look with Marcus that spoke volumes about what they thought of being reduced to components of a brand vision. What about pricing? Asked Jana Walsh, who'd been buying gifts at Coastal Bloom for 3 years. Will you be maintaining the current price points? That's actually one of the areas where I see the most opportunity for improvement, Chloe said, her enthusiasm returning as she moved to safer ground. Right now, we're charging premium prices for items that customers could find much cheaper elsewhere. With better sourcing strategies, we can offer similar aesthetic appeal at more accessible price points. Similar aesthetic appeal, David repeated slowly. You mean mass-produced items that look like handmade pieces? I mean finding smart wholesale partnerships that allow us to offer coastal-themed home decor and accessories at prices that make sense for a broader customer base, Chloe corrected, though her correction wasn't really a correction at all. The room had gone completely quiet except for the sound of Sarah's pen scratching across her notebook. Everyone was staring at Chloe with expressions ranging from confusion to horror to barely controlled anger, and Chloe, apparently oblivious to the mood shift, continued to smile brightly as she outlined her plans to destroy everything that made Coastal Bloom special while maintaining just enough surface authenticity to fool casual tourists. In the corner, Theo stood with his arms crossed, watching his fiancée reveal exactly who she was and what she valued. His expression was unreadable, but something in his posture suggested he was making decisions that would have consequences. Far beyond this evening, the test was working exactly as Vivian had predicted. Chloe was exposing herself with every word, and the community was bearing witness to what their beloved boutique would become under her leadership. The only question now was whether she would recognize the growing hostility in the room and try to backtrack, or whether she would continue digging herself deeper into a hole that would be impossible to climb out of. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. 23 pairs of eyes stared at Chloe with expressions ranging from disappointment to disgust, while she continued to smile with the oblivious confidence of someone who genuinely believed she'd do. Saint impressed everyone with her business acumen. Finally, Mrs. Rivera broke the quiet with a voice like steel wrapped in velvet. Dear, she said, addressing Chloe with the kind of patience usually reserved for explaining basic concepts to small children. I think you might be misunderstanding what makes this boutique special to our community. Oh, I understand completely, Chloe replied, her tone carrying just a hint of condescension. Community connection is definitely part of the brand appeal, but we need to balance sentiment with sound business practices. Sentiment, Elena repeated, the word coming out like she was tasting something bitter. You think supporting local artists is sentiment? Well, it's lovely in theory, Chloe said, apparently missing the danger in Elena's tone. But from a practical standpoint, we need to focus on scalable solutions that can support business growth. Marcus stepped forward, his usually gentle demeanor replaced by something harder. Scalable solutions. Do you know how long I've been developing the techniques I use for my textiles? I'm sure it's been quite a journey, Chloe said dismissively. But consumers don't really care about process, they care about the final product and the price point. 15 years, Marcus continued as if she hadn't spoken. 15 years of experimenting with natural dyes, perfecting tension techniques, building relationships with fiber suppliers. My scarves aren't just products, they're the result of decades of dedication to craft. And they're beautiful, Chloe said quickly, clearly sensing she was losing the room. But the reality is that most customers can't tell the difference between your hand-woven scarves and high-quality machine-made alternatives. If we can offer similar aesthetics at half the price, get out. The words came from David Martinez, spoken with such quiet authority that they cut through Chloe's explanation like blade through silk. Very head in the room turned toward him, and I saw his hands shaking with barely controlled anger. I'm sorry, Chloe said, her confident facade finally beginning to crack. I said get out, David repeated, louder this time. You clearly have no idea what you're talking about. And frankly, listening to you dismiss 5 years of Layla's work and the livelihoods of 30 local artists is making me sick. Now wait just a minute, Chloe began, but she was interrupted by a murmur of agreement from the crowd. He's right, Jana Walsh said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been shopping local businesses for 20 years. You're talking about destroying everything that makes this place worth visiting. I'm not destroying anything, Chloe protested, her voice rising with frustration. I'm modernizing, I'm creating efficiencies. I'm building a sustainable business model that can actually grow instead of staying trapped in small town limitations, small town limitations. The phrase hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. And I watched the faces around me harden with collective realization that Chloe saw their community as something to be transcended rather than sustainable for who? Sarah Chen asked, her pen still moving across her notebook. The local artists you're planning to eliminate? The customers who come here specifically for handmade items? Or just sustainable for your profit margins? Profit margins matter, Chloe shot back, her composure finally beginning to unravel. This is a business, not a charity. If Layla had been more focused on financial optimization instead of playing favorites with local artists, she could have built something much more successful by now. The collective intake of breath that followed was audible, 23 people processing the fact that Chloe had just dismissed everything Layla had accomplished as the result of poor business judgment and misplaced priorities. I felt something shift inside me, a kind of crystalline clarity that comes when pretense finally falls away and truth stands naked in harsh light. For weeks, I'd been trying to be diplomatic, trying to give Chloe chances to prove herself, trying to maintain family harmony while protecting my business. But watching her stand in my boutique and dismiss my life's work as inefficient charity work stripped away any remaining inclination toward politeness. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through the rising murmur of conversation, I think we should discuss what success looks like. Every head turned toward me and I saw Chloe's expression shift from defensive anger to something that might have been relief. Perhaps she thought I was going to rescue her from the increasingly hostile crowd. Coastal Bloom generates enough revenue to support my salary, rent on this prime location, insurance, utilities, and commission payments to over 40 local artists. I continued, my tone conversational but carrying an edge that made people lean in to listen. Last year alone, we paid out over $60,000 to local craftspeople, which directly supported 12 full-time artists and 28 part-time makers. I paused, letting the numbers sink in while I watched Chloe's face go pale. Our customer retention rate is 87%, which means almost 9 out of 10 people who shop here once come back regularly. We have a waiting list for custom orders, and 3 other coastal towns have approached me about opening satellite locations. Sarah Chen was writing furiously, and I could see other guests exchanging looks of surprise. Most of them had no idea about the business metrics behind Coastal Bloom's friendly, community-focused exterior. So when you say I could have built something much more successful, I continued, addressing Chloe directly, what exactly do you mean, more revenue? We could achieve that by raising prices. But that would price out half our customers more profit. We could achieve that by cutting artist commissions. But that would destroy the relationships that make this business unique. More locations. We could franchise the concept, but that would dilute the local focus that creates customer loyalty. Chloe opened her mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. Or maybe by more successful you mean the kind of generic boutique that looks good in Instagram photos but offers nothing that customers can't find in any mall in America. Is that your definition of success? The silence that followed was different from the earlier quiet. This was the silence of people watching a reckoning unfold. Layla, I think you're mischaracterizing what I said, Chloe began, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. Am I asked. Because what I heard was you telling a room full of people who've supported this business for -1 years that their preferences don't matter, that the artists they've grown to love are expendable overhead, and that the community connections they value are inefficient sentiment. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Mrs. Rivera interjected, her voice sharp with the authority of a retired teacher who'd spent decades managing difficult conversations. Because it sounded like you think we're all too stupid to notice the difference between handmade and mass-produced items. Of course not, Chloe said quickly. I just think there are opportunities to serve a broader market by betraying the existing market, Elena said flatly. By taking something unique and turning it into something generic for the sake of profit margins you don't even need. Chloe looked around the room, clearly realizing for the first time that she'd lost her audience entirely. Her confident presentation had devolved into damage control, and even that wasn't going well. Look, she said, her voice taking on a slightly desperate edge, maybe I'm not explaining this clearly. The core concept would remain the same: coastal boutique, local flavor, artisan appeal. I'm just talking about optimizing the business model to make it more sustainable and profitable. For who? Theo asked quietly. Everyone turned to look at him, including Chloe, who seemed surprised that he'd spoken at all. He'd been standing in the corner for the entire presentation, observing everything with the careful attention I'd come to associate with him. What do you mean, for who? Chloe asked. You keep talking about sustainability and profitability, Theo said, stepping slightly forward so everyone could hear him clearly. But sustainable for who? Profitable for who? Because from what I can see, Layla has built something that's already sustainable for the artists who depend on it. Profitable enough to support her and contribute to the local economy, and valued by customers who keep coming back year after year. Well, of course, but, so when you talk about making it more sustainable and profitable, what you really mean is making it more profitable for you, even if that makes it less sustainable for everyone else. The accusation hung in the air like an executioner's blade, and I watched Chloe realize that her own fiancé had just publicly called out her selfishness and greed. Theo, that's not fair, she said, her voice cracking slightly. We're supposed to be building a life together. This business is going to be part of our future, is it? Theo asked, his tone still quiet but carrying a weight that made everyone in the room lean in to listen. Because the future you're describing sounds like it involves destroying everything that makes this business worth inheriting. I'm not destroying anything. You're planning to eliminate 2/3 of the local artists who make this place special, Theo said. You want to replace handmade items with mass-produced alternatives. You're talking about moving locations to save money and franchising the concept to make more money. What part of what Layla built are you actually planning to keep? The question hit like a physical blow, and I watched Chloe struggle to find an answer that wouldn't further indict her priorities. The essence, she said finally, the coastal aesthetic, the boutique experience, the brand identity, Theo repeated slowly. You mean the marketing image, not the actual substance? The substance is the customer experience, Chloe shot back, her frustration finally boiling over into anger. And if customers can get the same experience at better prices with more convenient locations, that's good business, but it's not the same experience, Mrs. Rivera said firmly. The experience is meeting Elena and hearing about her pottery techniques. It's watching Marcus demonstrate his weaving process during the Summer Arts Festival. It's knowing that when I buy something here, I'm supporting my neighbors and keeping traditional crafts alive. Those are nice stories, Chloe said, her diplomatic mask finally slipping completely, but stories don't pay the bills, profit margins do. The collective recoil was almost physical. I watched 23 people process the fact that Chloe had just dismissed their values, their community, and their reasons for supporting local business as nice stories that were less important than profit margins. I think, Sarah Chen said, closing her notebook with a decisive snap, I have everything I need for my article. The sound of her notebook closing seemed to break whatever spell had held the room in suspended animation. People began moving toward the door, their conversations muted but intense. I caught fragments of shocked commentary and angry whispers as they filed out. Elena paused beside me on her way out. Layla, she said quietly. Please tell me you're not really going to give this business to her. The evaluation process is ongoing, I said carefully, aware that Chloe was close enough to overhear. Elena studied my face for a moment, then nodded. Good, because losing you would be bad enough. Losing you and having her destroy everything you built would be devastating. Within 10 minutes, the boutique was empty except for Chloe, Theo, and me. The silence was profound, broken only by the sound of wind rattling the windows and the distant cry of seagulls over the harbor. Chloe stood in the middle of the room looking shell-shocked, her carefully planned presentation having collapsed into public humiliation. Her white dress, which had looked so crisp and professional 2 hours ago, now seemed wilted and inappropriate, like costume from a play where she'd forgotten her lines. That didn't go very well, Theo said finally, his voice carrying an odd mixture of sadness and relief. They just don't understand modern business practices, Chloe said, but her heart wasn't in the defense anymore. Small-town people are resistant to change, or maybe, Theo said quietly, they understand something about value that you don't. Chloe turned to stare at him, and I saw the moment she realized that her fiancé was not going to support her interpretation of what had just happened. Whose side are you on? She asked, her voice sharp with betrayal. I'm on the side of honesty, Theo replied, and honestly, Chloe, what happened here tonight was you revealing that you don't understand or value what Layla has built. I understand it perfectly. No, Theo interrupted, his patience finally exhausted. You understand the potential profit, you understand the marketing opportunities, you understand the Instagram aesthetic, but you don't understand the heart of it, and you don't care about the people who depend on it. The people who depend on it will find other opportunities. Stop. Theo's voice cut through her explanation like a blade. Just stop. I've been listening to you talk about this business for weeks, and not once have you mentioned caring about the artists whose livelihoods you're planning to eliminate. Not once have you talked about serving the community that supports this place. Every conversation has been about optimization and profit margins and growth opportunities. Chloe stared at him, her mouth slightly open, clearly not prepared for this level of confrontation from someone she'd always been able to count on for support. That's what business is about, she said finally. Making money, everything else is secondary, and that, Theo said sadly, is why I can't marry you. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through the air. Chloe's face went white, then red, then white again as she processed what he'd just said. What? I can't marry someone who thinks everything else is secondary to making money, Theo repeated. I thought I was in love with someone who wanted to build something meaningful, who cared about community and craftsmanship and making a difference in people's lives. But that person doesn't exist, does she? Theo, you're being ridiculous. Am I? Because the woman I fell in love with would never have stood in front of 30 artists and customers and told them their values were nice stories that mattered less than profit margins. Chloe looked from Theo to me and back again, clearly trying to process the fact that her perfect evening of showcasing her business vision had somehow turned into her fiancé calling off their wedding. This is her fault, she said suddenly, pointing at me with shaking finger. She set this up. She invited all those people knowing they'd react badly to change. She sabotaged me. No, Theo said firmly. She gave you exactly what you asked for, a chance to show everyone who you really are and what you really value, and you did. I showed them modern business thinking. You showed them that you see their community as an inefficiency to be correct, and their values as obstacles to profit maximization, Theo said, and you did it with such conviction that I finally understood who I was really planning to marry. Chloe turned to me, her eyes bright with tears and fury. you did this on purpose. You knew they'd react this way, you set me up to fail. I gave you an opportunity to succeed, I replied calmly. What you did with that opportunity was entirely your choice. This is ridiculous, Chloe said, her voice rising toward hysteria. I'm not going to let you destroy my relationship and steal my business because you're too sentimental to make smart financial decisions. Your business, I repeated quietly, the business you promised to give me, Chloe clarified. But something in my tone had made her suddenly uncertain. Actually, I said, walking to the counter where I'd left Vivian's legal documents, I never promised to give you anything. I agreed to evaluate your readiness to inherit a business, and to make my decision based on that evaluation. I pulled out the conditional transfer agreement and set it on the counter where she could see it, and based on tonight's demonstration of your understanding of this business, your appreciation for its community relationships, and your plans for its future, I continued, I'm afraid you don't meet the requirements for transfer. Chloe stared at the document, then at me, then at Theo, who was watching the proceedings with something that looked like relief. You can't do this, she said finally. Derek promised. Derek can't promise to give away something that belongs to me, I said, and after tonight, I think it's clear that Coastal Bloom and I are staying together. My parents will never forgive you for this, Chloe said, her voice low and dangerous. They've been telling everyone about your generous gift. They've made this part of the wedding celebration. If you back out now, you'll humiliate our entire family. Then maybe, I said quietly, your family shouldn't have announced something that hadn't actually been decided yet. Chloe stood there for a moment longer, clearly trying to think of some argument or threat that would change the situation in her favor, but the damage was done. The truth was out, and even she seemed to realize that there was no walking back from what had been revealed. This isn't over, she said finally, grabbing her purse and heading for the door. My family won't let you embarrass us like this. After she left, Theo and I stood in the sudden quiet of the empty boutique. The warm lighting that had seemed so welcoming to hours ago now felt intimate and peaceful, like the calm that follows a storm. Are you okay? I asked him. I think so, he said, though his voice suggested he was still processing everything that had happened. It's strange, I should probably be devastated right now, but mostly I just feel relieved, like I just avoided making the biggest mistake of my life. He looked around the boutique, taking in the carefully arranged displays and the handmade beauty of everything I'd built. This place is special, Layla. What you've created here matters. I'm glad you're not giving it up, even if it costs you your relationship with Derek's family. Theo was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Some relationships aren't worth preserving if they require you to sacrifice everything you believe in. As I locked up the boutique that night, I realized that the real test wasn't whether Chloe could run my business, it was whether I had the courage to refuse to give it to someone who would destroy it. And thanks to Chloe's own words and actions, that question had finally been answered. I woke Sunday morning to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The first call was from Derek at 6:47 a.m., followed by increasingly frantic messages from various Whitmore family members. But it was the text from Tessa at 6:15 a.m. that made me sit up in bed. Check the Coastal Weekly website. Sarah worked all night. It's perfect. Sarah Chen's article was titled When Family Generosity Goes Wrong, Local Business Owner Protects Community Against Hostile Takeover. The subheading read, Wedding Gift Becomes Cautionary Tale About the Difference Between Supporting Family and Enabling Entitlement. The piece was devastating in its precision. Sarah had captured not just the events of Saturday evening, but the deeper story of what happened when outside priorities threatened established community relationships. She'd interviewed several guests after they left the boutique, including Elena and Marcus, whose quotes perfectly illustrated what Chloe's vision would have meant for local artists. I've been perfecting my pottery techniques for 8 years, said Elena Vasquez, whose ceramic work has been featured at Coastal Bloom since its second year of operation. The idea that my pieces could be replaced by mass-produced items because customers supposedly can't tell the difference is heartbreaking. It shows a fundamental misunderstanding of what handmade craftsmanship means to both artists and customers. But the most damaging quote came from Chloe herself, which Sarah had recorded during the presentation. Stories don't pay the bills. Profit margins do. When pressed about the community relationships that make Coastal Bloom unique, The prospective new owner dismissed them as nice stories that were less important than financial optimization. My phone rang as I finished reading the article. Derek's name appeared on the screen, and I could tell from the background noise that he was already in his car, probably driving over. Layla, what the hell happened last night? His voice carried a mixture of panic and anger that I'd never heard before. My parents are furious, Chloe is hysterical, and now there's an article in the paper making our family look like greedy monsters. What happened? I said calmly. Is that Chloe had an opportunity to demonstrate her understanding of my business, and she chose to reveal her real plans for it. Her real plans. She was just sharing some ideas, Derek. She told a room full of loyal customers and local artists that their values were nice stories that mattered less than profit margins. She announced plans to eliminate 2/3 of the artisans who depend on this business. She couldn't even remember Elena's name. She was nervous. It was her first time presenting to a group like that. You should have been more supportive instead of letting everyone attack her. I felt something cold settle in my chest as I realized Derek was more concerned about his family's embarrassment than about what Chloe had actually revealed about her character and intentions. I didn't let anyone attack her, I said. I gave her exactly what she asked for, a chance to share her vision with the community. What they heard was her vision, but the article makes it sound like she wanted to destroy your business, because that's exactly what she wanted to do, Derek. She wants to gut everything that makes Coastal Bloom special and replace it with a generic tourist shop that happens to use the same name. Silence stretched across the line, broken only by the sound of Derek's car turning into our driveway. We need to talk, he said. I'm outside. I found Derek in the kitchen, still in yesterday's clothes, his hair disheveled and his eyes red with exhaustion and stress. He looked like a man who'd spent the night trying to manage a crisis that kept getting worse with every phone call. My parents want to see you, he said without preamble. Today, they think there's been a misunderstanding, and they want to work things out before this gets any worse. What kind of misunderstanding? They think you deliberately sabotaged Chloe to make her look bad. They think you invited hostile witnesses who were predisposed to resist change, and you set up the whole evening to embarrass our family. I stared at my husband, searching his face for some sign that he understood how deeply his family's interpretation missed the point. Derek, do you think I sabotaged Chloe? He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes focused on his hands rather than my face. I think you could have been more supportive, he said finally. I think you could have helped her present her ideas in a way that wouldn't have provoked such a negative reaction. By helping her lie about what she actually planned to do, by helping her communicate more diplomatically, by preparing the audience better, by... He stopped, apparently realizing how his suggestions sounded. By manipulating the situation so that everyone would pretend to be happy about her plans to destroy everything I built. I finished. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant, I said quietly. You wanted me to manage everyone's reactions, so that your family could get what they wanted without having to face any uncomfortable truths about what they were asking for. Derek's phone buzzed with a text, and I caught a glimpse of his mother's name on the screen. They're expecting us at noon, he said, reading the message. My dad thinks if we all sit down together, we can find a solution that works for everyone. What kind of solution? Maybe Chloe starts with a smaller role in the business. Maybe she takes over gradually, with more training and oversight. Maybe we find a way to address the community concerns while still honoring our commitment to help her, our commitment, as if I had somehow obligated myself to sacrifice my business regardless of Chloe's suitability or intentions. Derek, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Okay, do you think Chloe is ready to run Coastal Bloom, based on everything you've seen and heard? Do you genuinely believe she understands what that responsibility involves? Derek was quiet for so long that I began to think he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I think she needs more time to fully understand the complexities. That's not what I asked. Another long pause. No, he said finally. I don't think she's ready, but I think she could become ready if given the right support and guidance. And if she can't, if the fundamental disconnect between her values and the business's mission can't be bridged, then we'll deal with that when it happens, Derek said. But his tone suggested he was hoping it wouldn't come to that. It already has happened, Derek. Last night proved that Chloe and I have completely different ideas about what this business should B. She sees inefficiencies to be optimized. I see relationships to be nurtured. She sees profit margins to be maximized. I see community to be served. Maybe there's a middle ground. There isn't. I said firmly, you can't serve to masters. Either this business exists to extract maximum profit from tourists, or it exists to support local artists and serve the community. Chloe has made it clear which version she prefers. Derek's phone rang, and his mother's name appeared on the screen again. He looked at it with something approaching dread. I have to answer this, he said. I listened to one side of a conversation that grew increasingly tense as Mrs. Whitmore apparently shared her thoughts about the morning's newspaper article and her expectations for the afternoon's family meeting. Derek's responses consisted mainly of yes, Mom, and I understand and will be there. When he hung up, his face was pale. She's not happy, he said unnecessarily. What did she say? That this has gone far enough, that you've embarrassed the family publicly, and now you need to make it right, that Chloe is devastated, and the least you can do is find a way to honor the commitment we made. The commitment you made, I corrected, without consulting me. Layla, please, can't you just come to the meeting? Can't we at least try to find a solution? I looked at my husband. This man I'd married 3 years ago, this person I thought understood and supported my dreams and ambitions, but standing in our kitchen on this gray Sunday morning, I realized that Derek had never truly seen me as an individual with my own valid priorities and boundaries. In his mind, I was part of the Whitmore family system, and family systems required individual members to sacrifice for the collective good. What would you do, I asked him, if your parents asked you to give up your real estate business to help Chloe start her married life? That's different. How is it different? Because I've been building my career for 10 years, I have established clients, ongoing relationships. I've been building my business for 5 years. I have established vendor relationships, loyal customers, a reputation in the community. But it's not the same kind of professional commitment. Why not? Derek opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. I could see him struggling with the realization that his automatic assumption that my business was somehow less important or less permanent than his career didn't hold up to logical examination. It just feels different, he said finally. It feels different because you've never seen my work as being as important as yours, I said. You've never seen Coastal Bloom as my career, you've seen it as my hobby that happened to make money. That's not true, Derek. When you suggested giving the boutique to Chloe, did you consider the possibility that I might not want to start over? That I might have already built exactly what I wanted to build? I thought you'd be excited about new opportunities. You thought I'd be grateful for the chance to sacrifice my established success for your sister's untested ambitions. The truth of the statement hung between us like a gulf neither of us knew how to cross. Derek stared at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time, and I could tell he was beginning to understand the magnitude of what his family had asked me to give up. What do you want me to tell my parents? He asked finally. Tell them the truth. Tell them that I evaluated Chloe's readiness to inherit my business, and she didn't meet the requirements. Tell them that I'm not willing to destroy something I spent 5 years building just to avoid disappointing people who never bothered to understand what they were asking for. They'll never forgive you for this, and if I give in to their pressure and hand over my life's work to someone who will destroy it, I'll never forgive myself. Derek left for his parents' house alone, and I spent the afternoon in the boutique, surrounded by the quiet beauty of everything I'd almost lost. Customers stopped by throughout the day, some drawn by Sarah's article, others by word-of-mouth accounts of Saturday's event. The common thread was support for my decision and relief that Coastal Bloom would remain unchanged. Mrs. Rivera brought flowers and a handwritten note. Thank you for protecting something precious. This community is lucky to have you. Elena and Marcus came together, carrying a joint gift, a custom piece that combined Elena's pottery with Marcus's textile work, created specifically to commemorate what they called the victory of values over profit. Even strangers approached me with encouragement. A young woman from the next town over said she'd driven 30 minutes after reading the article because she wanted to support a business owner who'd awesome community over compromise. But the most meaningful visitor was Theo, who appeared around closing time carrying coffee and what looked like legal documents. How are you holding up? He asked, settling into the reading corner where so much of this drama had unfolded. Better than expected, I said honestly. It feels good to finally be honest about what I want and what I'm willing to sacrifice for it. I know the feeling. He gestured toward the papers he'd brought. I spent the morning with my lawyer, formally ending the engagement and sorting out the legal implications. How is Chloe handling it? About as well as you'd expect. She's convinced that you manipulated me into leaving her, and she's threatening all kinds of legal action if you don't honor what she calls our verbal contract about the business transfer. Verbal contract. Her theory is that Derek's initial request constituted a binding agreement, and your subsequent evaluation process was just a formality. She thinks she has legal standing to force the transfer. I felt a chill of anxiety. Does she? Theo smiled grimly. Not according to my lawyer, especially not after Saturday night's demonstration of her intentions for the business. But she's angry enough to try, which means you should probably be prepared for some unpleasant legal threats. What about Derek's family? How are they handling your decision to end the engagement? They're furious. Of course, they think I'm overreacting to what they call normal business thinking. They can't understand why I would end a relationship over what they see as a minor disagreement about retail strategy. And you? I feel like I dodged a bullet, Theo said simply. The woman I fell in love with wouldn't have stood in front of 30 people and dismissed their values as obstacles to profit maximization, if that woman ever existed. She's been replaced by someone whose priorities I can't respect or support. As evening fell and I prepared to close the boutique, I reflected on how much had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday morning, I'd been trapped in a situation where any choice seemed wrong: give up my business or disappoint my husband's family. But by standing firm on my values and letting Chloe reveal her true character, I'd found a third option: refuse to participate in a system that required me to sacrifice my principles for the sake of family harmony. The cost would be significant. Derek's family would never forgive me, and my marriage might not survive their anger and disappointment. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again, like a woman who'd built something meaningful and had the courage to protect it. Outside, the harbor lights were beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk, and the familiar sounds of the coastal evening were settling into their rhythm. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, Coastal Bloom was safe, the community was intact. And I was finally free to be the person I'd always been, someone who understood the difference between the price of everything and the value of what matters most. 2 weeks later, I stood in the morning light streaming through Coastal Bloom's windows, watching Maggie Santos arrange a display of sea glass jewelry with the careful attention I'd come to expect from her. At 26, she had the kind of quiet competence that reminded me of myself at her age: determined but not desperate, ambitious but not ruthless, creative but grounded in practical reality. The blue pieces catch the light better when they're positioned at an angle, I suggested, adjusting one of the necklaces slightly. I see it now, Maggie said, stepping back to evaluate the display. It's like they're reflecting the ocean outside the window. Exactly, that's the kind of connection our customers love, when the jewelry seems to capture the spirit of the place where they found it. Maggie had started as a part-time employee 6 months ago, but over the past 2 weeks, she'd evolved into something much more significant. With Vivian's help, we'd structured a partnership agreement that would gradually transfer 30% ownership of Coastal Bloom to her over the next 3 years. Unlike the Whitmore family's expectation of immediate gratification, Maggie understood that earning a stake in something meaningful required time, commitment, and proof of shared values. Mrs. River is coming in this afternoon to see the new pottery shipment, Maggie said, checking our appointment book, and Elena wants to discuss expanding her line to include serving pieces. Perfect. What about the Martinez order for their anniversary party? Marcus finished the custom table runners yesterday. They're beautiful. He incorporated that silver thread technique you suggested. I smiled, watching Maggie move through the boutique with growing confidence and familiarity. She knew our artisans by name, understood their techniques and specialties, and had begun developing her own relationships with regular customers. More importantly, she grasped the deeper purpose of what we were doing, supporting local craftsmanship while creating a gathering place for people who valued authenticity over convenience. The bell above the door chimed, and Tessa entered carrying her usual offering of coffee and what looked like a newspaper. Morning, ladies, she said, settling the coffee on the counter with a grin that suggested good news. Have you seen today's edition of the regional paper? What now? I asked. though Tessa's expression indicated this was positive rather than problematic. She unfolded the paper to reveal a full-page feature titled, Coastal Bloom, a Model for Community-Centered Business. The article included photos of the boutique, interviews with several of our artisans, and a sidebar about the economic impact of supporting local craftspeople. They picked up Sarah's original story and expanded it into a larger piece about the value of independently owned businesses. Tessa explained, "You're being held up as an example of how to build something that serves both economic and social purposes." I read through the article, surprised by its scope and depth. The reporter had interviewed Elena about how her pottery business had grown from a hobby to a sustainable career thanks to steady sales through Coastal Bloom. Marcus discussed the way our partnership had allowed him to focus on perfecting his craft rather than worrying about marketing and sales. Even Mrs. Rivera was quoted, explaining how the boutique had become a community gathering place where neighbors connected over shared appreciation for beautiful, locally made objects. "This is wonderful," Maggie said, reading over my shoulder. "It really captures what makes this place special." And Tessa added with a particularly satisfied smile, "It includes a very brief mention of the previous ownership transfer situation," noting that business owner Layla Hassan chose to maintain the boutique's community focus rather than pursue more commercially oriented alternatives. I looked up from the article to find both women watching me with expressions of pride and support. Over the past 2 weeks, as news of the Whitmore family drama had spread through the local business community, I'd been surprised by how many people had reached out to express appreciation for my decision. Fellow entrepreneurs, longtime customers, and even strangers had made a point of visiting the boutique to offer encouragement and support. Speaking of which, Tessa continued, "Have you heard anything from Derek lately?" The question I'd been dreading but knew would eventually arise. Derek had been staying at his parents' house since our confrontation 2 weeks ago, ostensibly to help manage what his mother called the family crisis, but more likely to avoid the uncomfortable conversations that would be required if he came home. "He texted yesterday," I said carefully. "He wants to meet for dinner this week to discuss our situation." "And how do you feel about that?" Maggie asked. I'd been asking myself the same question for days. Honestly, I'm not sure we have anything left to discuss. The truth was that Derek's response to the entire situation had revealed fundamental differences in our values and priorities that I wasn't sure could be bridged. His immediate concern had been family embarrassment rather than understanding what had actually happened. His proposed solutions had focused on managing appearances rather than addressing the underlying issues of respect and autonomy. Most damaging of all, he'd never once acknowledged that I might have legitimate reasons for refusing to sacrifice my life's work for his sister's convenience. "Maybe the dinner will surprise you," Tessa suggested, though her tone indicated she wasn't particularly optimistic. "Maybe," I agreed, though I suspected the dinner would be Derek's final attempt to convince me to find some compromise that would restore family harmony at my expense. The bell chimed again, and Elena entered carrying a box that probably contained her latest pottery creations. She'd been working on a new line of serving pieces specifically designed for Coastal Bloom, inspired by the textures and colors of the local coastline. "Layla, perfect timing," she said, setting the box on the counter with obvious excitement. "I finished the pieces we discussed, and I think you're going to love them." As Elena unpacked her new work bowls and platters that seemed to capture the essence of weathered driftwood and sea Warnston, I reflected on how much richer my life had become by choosing to protect and nurture these relationships rather than sacrifice them for abstract family obligations. "These are incredible," Maggie said, carefully lifting one of the serving bowls to examine its subtle glazing. "The way the colors shift in the light is mesmerizing, Elena. These are going to be perfect for the holiday season," I added. "People are going to want complete sets for entertaining." "That's what I was hoping," Elena said, beaming with the satisfaction of an artist whose work was understood and valued. "I've been experimenting with the glazing technique for months, trying to get just the right variation in color on texture, as we discuss pricing, display strategies, and production timelines." I realized this was exactly the kind of conversation that Chloe would have dismissed as inefficient sentimentality. But these discussions were the heart of what made Coastal Bloom successful: genuine partnerships with artists who cared about their craft, honest communication about business realities, and mutual respect for each other's expertise and contributions. Around lunchtime, Vivian stopped by with the finalized partnership documents for Maggie and an update on what she called the Whitmore situation. Any word from Chloe about potential legal action? I asked as we settled in the reading corner with coffee. Nothing concrete yet, Vivian said. My contacts suggest she consulted with a few lawyers, but apparently none of them were willing to take on a case based on a verbal promise to consider a gift transfer. Especially not after the newspaper coverage made it clear that she's completely unsuited for the responsibility. What about Derek's family? Any movements on that front? Interestingly, yes, Vivian pulled out a legal folder that looked official and slightly ominous. It seems the senior Whitmores are considering their own legal options. My stomach tightened. What kind of legal options? They're exploring whether Derek has any community property claims to Coastal Bloom that would give them leverage in forcing a transfer. But the business predates our marriage, I said, though I could hear the uncertainty in my own voice. Which should protect you, Vivian agreed. But they're looking for any angle they can find improvements made during the marriage, growth in value since the wedding, any financial contributions Derek might have made to the business operations. I thought back over the past 3 years, trying to remember any significant financial entanglements. Derek had occasionally helped with minor expenses, and his brother had built some custom shelving at cost. But the vast majority of investment in Coastal Bloom had come from my own earnings and business loans in my name alone. I don't think they'll find much, I said finally, but the fact that they're looking suggests they're not planning to back down gracefully. No, Vivian agreed. Which is why I want to make sure all your legal protections are absolutely bulletproof, and why I think the partnership with Maggie is even more important than we initially discussed. How so? Because if you're sharing ownership with someone who clearly understands and supports the business's mission, it becomes much harder for outside parties to argue that major changes should be imposed against your wishes. Maggie looked up from the jewelry display she'd been perfecting. Are you saying my partnership helps protect the boutique from hostile takeover attempts? In a sense, yes, Vivian said. It demonstrates that you're committed to continuity and community investment rather than personal profit maximization. It also creates additional legal complications for anyone trying to force changes against the owner's wishes. As afternoon settled into evening, I found myself alone in the boutique, going through the familiar closing routines that had anchored my days for 5 years, counting the register, checking displays, turning off lights, setting the security system, each task a small ritual that connected me to the dream I'd fought so hard to protect. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Can we meet tomorrow night? Romano's at 7. We need to talk. Romano's again. The place where this whole situation had begun, where Derek had first asked me to consider giving away my life's work for the sake of family harmony. There was a certain symmetry to returning there. For what would likely be our final conversation about the subject, I typed back my acceptance, then stood in the quiet boutique for a few more minutes, surrounded by the beautiful objects and meaningful relationships that I'd chosen to prioritize over family expectations and social pressure. Tomorrow's dinner with Derek would be difficult, but I was no longer the uncertain woman who'd sat across from him 6 weeks ago, trying to process his impossible request. I was someone who'd discovered the strength to say no to people I loved when they asked me to betray my own values. I was someone who'd built something worth protecting and had found the courage to protect it. Whatever Derek wanted to discuss tomorrow, I would meet him as an equal, not as someone who owed explanations or apologies for refusing to sacrifice her dreams for his family's convenience, but as someone who'd made thoughtful choices about her priorities and was prepared to live with the consequences. The harbor lights were beginning to sparkle in the gathering dusk as I locked the door behind me. Coastal Bloom would be here tomorrow, and the day after that, and for as long as I had the strength and vision to maintain it. And for the first time in weeks, that felt like a victory rather than just a temporary reprieve. 6 months later, I stood at the podium of the Harbor View Conference Center, looking out at an audience of local business owners, community leaders, and journalists who had gathered for the annual Coastal Business Awards. The weight of the Crystal Trophy in my hands, Entrepreneur of the Year for Community Impact, felt both surprising and inevitable. A recognition of something I'd never set out to achieve but had somehow accomplished through the simple act of refusing to compromise my values. When I opened Coastal Bloom 5.5 years ago, I began, my voice carrying easily through the room. I thought I was just starting a small business. I had no idea I was actually creating a model for how commerce could serve community, how profit could coexist with purpose, or how saying no to the wrong opportunities could lead to the right kind of success. In the audience, I could see familiar faces beaming with pride. Tessa sat at a front table, her food truck business having expanded to 3 locations after being featured in the same regional article that had celebrated Coastal Bloom. Elena and Marcus were there with several other artists whose work had gained recognition through our boutique's growing reputation. Mrs. Rivera occupied a place of honor at the head table, having been instrumental in nominating me for the award. And in the back corner, wearing a reserved but genuine smile, sat Theo. He'd become an unexpected friend over the past months. Our shared experience of choosing integrity over family expectations creating a bond neither of us had anticipated. His accounting firm had thrived after he'd made the difficult decision to prioritize his values over social pressure, and he'd recently begun dating Sarah Chen, the journalist whose article had helped expose the truth about the Whitmore family's demands. The past 6 months have taught me that success isn't just about financial metrics, I continued. It's about building something that makes your community stronger, that supports the dreams of others, and that you can be proud of when you look in the mirror each morning. The applause was warm and sustained, but what moved me most were the faces in the audience, people who understood that this award wasn't just about one business owner's achievement, but about the validation of an approach to commerce that prioritized relationships over pure profit. After the ceremony, as I mingled with well-wishers and accepted congratulations, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that difficult evening at Romano's 8 months ago when Derek had first suggested giving my business to his sister. That final dinner conversation had gone exactly as I'd expected. Derek had arrived with a carefully prepared speech about family obligations, community expectations, and the importance of finding compromises that honored everyone's needs. But underneath his diplomatic language, the message had been clear. His family's comfort mattered more than my autonomy, their reputation was more important than my dreams, and maintaining their harmony was worth sacrificing my life's work. I'd listened patiently, then explained with quiet firmness that I wasn't willing to negotiate away something I'd built with my own hands and heart. Derek had tried various approaches appealing to my love for him, warning about the social consequences of defying his family, even suggesting that my refusal to be generous revealed character flaws that disappointed him. But I discovered something powerful during those weeks of crisis. Once you know your own worth and establish clear boundaries, other people's attempts to manipulate you lose their effectiveness. Derek's family had taught me to recognize emotional manipulation by using it so extensively, and their lessons had made me immune to his gentler versions of the same tactics. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, conducted with the kind of cold efficiency that Derek preferred for unpleasant business. He'd tried to claim community property rights to Coastal Bloom, but Vivian's thorough documentation and the premarital origins of the business had protected me completely. Derek had received exactly what he'd contributed to my success. Nothing, Layla. Elena's voice brought me back to the present, as she approached with a champagne flute and a radiant smile. I can't believe you didn't mention in your speech that 3 of your artists are now selling their work in galleries across the region thanks to the connections they made through Coastal Bloom. Or that Maggie just got accepted to that prestigious business mentorship program, added Marcus, joining our conversation with his characteristic gentle enthusiasm. This award isn't about me, I said, meaning it completely. It's about all of us building something together that's bigger than any individual contribution, which is exactly why you deserved it, said a familiar voice behind me. I turned to find Mrs. Rivera approaching with the careful dignity she brought to all special occasions, wearing a dress that probably dated from the 1980s but carried with the kind of style that transcended fashion trends. Double quotes Mrs. Rivera. You look beautiful, I said, accepting her warm hug. And you look like a woman who finally understands her own worth, she replied with the directness that had made her such an effective teacher for 30 years. I'm proud of you for choosing yourself over people who didn't deserve your sacrifice. As the evening wound down and guests began to drift toward the exits, I found myself standing alone on the conference center's deck, looking out over the harbor where fishing boats bobbed gently in the moonlight. The familiar view reminded me of all the early mornings I'd spent in Coastal Bloom, watching the town wake up while I arranged displays and counted registers and built something meaningful one day at a time. "Congratulations," said a voice beside me. I turned to find Maggie approaching with 2 cups of coffee, and the kind of satisfied smile that comes from seeing someone you care about receive well-deserved recognition. "Thank you," I said, accepting the coffee gratefully, "and thank you for everything you've done to make this possible. None of tonight would have happened without your partnership and support. I think you're underestimating your own contributions," Maggie said with a laugh. "But I'm grateful for the opportunity to be part of something this special." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the harbor lights reflect on the dark water and listening to the gentle sounds of a coastal evening settling into rhythm. "What's next?" Maggie asked finally. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've just been recognized as Entrepreneur of the Year. You've built a business that supports 40+ local artists, serves hundreds of customers, and has become a model for community-centered commerce. You've survived a hostile takeover attempt and come out stronger than ever. What comes next for someone who's accomplished all that?" I considered the question while sipping my coffee and watching a late-night fishing boat make its way toward the harbor. What did come next for someone who discovered the power of saying no to the wrong opportunities and yes to the right ones? "More of the same, I think," I said finally. "More partnerships with artists who care about their craft. More relationships with customers who value authenticity over convenience. More proof that you can build something profitable and meaningful at the same time. And personally, any thoughts about dating again? Maybe finding someone who actually supports your ambitions instead of seeing them as obstacles to family harmony?" I smiled at Maggie's not-so-subtle reference to Derek's fundamental inability to see my business as anything other than a nice hobby that could be sacrificed when more important priorities arose. "Maybe eventually," I said, "but right now I'm enjoying the discovery that I don't need anyone else's approval or support to build a life I'm proud of. It's surprisingly liberating." "Good for you," Maggie said with genuine warmth. "Though I have to say, watching you handle the Whitmore family situation taught me a lot about setting boundaries and standing up for what matters." "What kind of boundaries?" "Well, for starters, my own family has been pressuring me to leave our partnership and take a more traditional job with better benefits and more predictable hours. Watching you refuse to sacrifice your dreams for family expectations gave me the courage to tell them that I'm building something I believe in, and their approval isn't required." I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with the award I'd received earlier. If my example had helped Maggie find the strength to pursue her own path despite family pressure, then everything I'd been through had served a purpose beyond just protecting my own business. "How did they react?" "About as well as you'd expect," Maggie said with a rueful smile. "But they're starting to come around as they see how happy and successful I am. Sometimes people need time to adjust their expectations. A year ago, I would have been devastated by the idea of disappointing family members or facing their disapproval. But the past months had taught me that some relationships can only survive if one person continuously sacrifices their authentic self to maintain artificial harmony, and those relationships, however painful to lose, aren't worth preserving at the cost of your own integrity. As we prepared to leave the conference center, I pulled out my phone to check messages and found a text that made me pause. "Everything okay?" Maggie asked, noticing my expression. "It's from Derek," I said, showing her the screen. "He says congratulations on the award, and he hopes I'm happy." "That's surprisingly gracious." "It is," I agreed, though I wasn't sure what to make of the message. Derek and I hadn't communicated since the divorce was finalized, and his family had maintained a wall of cold silence whenever our paths crossed in town. "Are you going to respond?" I considered the question while we walked to our cars. Derek's text felt like a tentative olive branch, an acknowledgement that maybe I'd been right to protect something he'd asked me to sacrifice. But I wasn't sure I was ready for any kind of reconciliation, even a distant and polite one. "Maybe eventually," I said finally, "but not tonight. Tonight is about celebrating what I've built, not processing what I've lost." As I drove home through the quiet streets of our coastal town, I reflected on how much had changed since that morning 8 months ago when Derek had first broached the idea of giving my business to his sister. Then I'd been someone who'd built something beautiful, but didn't fully understand her own power to protect it. Now I was someone who'd discovered that the courage to say no to wrong things automatically creates space for the right things to flourish. Coastal Bloom was thriving beyond anything I'd imagined when I'd first opened its doors. My partnership with Maggie had expanded our capacity to support local artists while ensuring the business's long-term sustainability. The recognition we'd received had attracted new customers and artists from across the region, turning our small boutique into a destination for people who valued authentic craftsmanship and community connection. But more than the business success, I discovered something about myself that no external recognition could validate or diminish. I was someone worth defending. My dreams were worth protecting. My values were worth upholding, even when that meant disappointing people I loved. As I pulled into my driveway and prepared to end this celebration of a day that had begun years ago, with a desperate hope and a small loan, I realized that success wasn't just about building something profitable or receiving public recognition. Success was about becoming the kind of person who could create something meaningful and have the courage to protect it when others tried to take it away. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, new artists to support and customers to serve, new decisions about how to balance growth with integrity. But tonight, as I settled into the home I'd chosen to keep when Derek moved out, surrounded by objects from my boutique and plans for its future, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you've lived according to your own values, rather than other people's expectations. I'd built something sweet, and I'd succeeded in keeping it that way, and that, I realized as I drifted off to sleep, was the best kind of success of all.